Hello there everyone, welcome back to my channel Fanfiction podcast. Today we will start a new journey of What If Dragon Kidnapped Luffy from his mother Big Mom Part 3. Before we start, please like, share, subscribe, and comment in the comment section if you want anything in the future. Be a small island, but instead it was a colossal island full of dinosaurs that Sabo had talked about. In the storybooks back in Fusha, Katakuri widened his eyes in surprise a bit. There were a lot of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. The Charlottes shouted in surprise and over the fact their brother found dinosaurs. Fucking dinosaurs that were supposed to be instinct. Now, they know that there are zoan fruits that give you the ability to turn into a dinosaur, but seeing the ancient animal itself up close and personal was slim to none. Even Linlin seemed surprised and mentally added Little Garden into her list of islands of interest. She could also use this chance to send Mondior and a few of her children to explore somewhere else or wants to study and capture these strange animals that her son had mentioned. Dinosaurs would be a nice addition to the forest parts of Toto Land. Maybe she should start a zoo. She internally mused. Yeah, dinosaurs. Luffy nodded in confirmation while grinning a bit in amusement over his siblings' faces. But how? They went extinct. Viro, the long-necked child, asked in surprise with widened eyes, although his hair covered them. Honestly, I don't know. Sabo told me they went extinct too till I found them. Luffy said while pouting a bit. He was pretty shocked when he came across the dinosaurs Sabo had mentioned before in books. He had been excited to meet one when he started sailing out, but that was immediately shot down with Sabo giving him a sheepish look with him explaining they were all gone. Well, until he actually sailed and visited Little Garden where he actually saw said extinct animals and made two big friends. Well, anyways, me and Vivi went into the forest. The plants and trees were huge. Katakuri was a stoic man, but he couldn't help but display a very rare expression that displayed emotions he rarely shown: surprise, disbelief, and slight fear. We later came across Dory and Brogy, and they were giants we made friends with. Silence. Nothing but silence. Luffy even kept silent instead of asking what was wrong when all his siblings looked at him in surprise and disbelief. But this was different. Their eyes were wide with their pupils shaking a bit, their mouths were hanging without any signs of closing, and they immediately went stiff as a statue. Every second that passes, the heavier and suffocating the atmosphere felt. The Charlottes wanted to ask questions, speak basic words. They wanted to let out a sound, anything to break the silence. But they couldn't. They stood like that before Katakuri slowly turned to look at their mother. The siblings lagged behind before following their eldest brother's action. They knew what their mother would feel and look like at this revelation, but they were still surprised to see such emotions displayed on her face. She was frozen stiff with a look of surprise. Although surprise was an extremely heavy understatement, it's just that there were no words. Anyone could describe her facial expression. You made friends with giants. Big Mom finally broke the silence with an unexpectedly very soft voice which surprised her. Children again. Luffy nodded at that. Yeah. Dory and Brogy are these awesome guys that has been fighting for over 100 years. They are really strong, and also big and tall just like you. He said, not really knowing how strong his mother was. Surprisingly, nobody has told him about how she was a Yonko for some reason yet. Luffy then grinned up towards her. You should meet them. They would like to fight another giant their size. His siblings whipped their head at him in surprise before quickly looking at their mother. They knew her ambitions and goals after all. At that, Big Mom looked down towards the deck in deep thought while taking her hand and clenching her other arm, squeezing it. If it were her past self, she would have immediately agreed, sailed towards paradise after dealing with the organ harvesting group and not give a shit about how the Marines would be panicking over a Yonko in paradise. But now, she didn't know what to do. She refused Loki's marriage proposal, which would have effectively created an alliance between her and the giants because she didn't want to hurt her daughter by marrying someone she didn't really know and show romantic interest to, but in doing so it probably caused her relations with giants to sour even further now. She could tell by Loki's voice turning soft before turning into anger and sadness when she denied him the hand of her daughter when conversing about the political marriage. And now she was given a chance by her son to meet up with two giants, a chance to finally make friends and possibly even have giants in Toto Land if she could persuade them. Her goal and drive was to bring every race possible into one place to unify and make Toto Land A safe haven where everyone wouldn't discriminate amongst each other. And yet it was the same drive and ambition that made her neglect her children and saw them as nothing more than tools or stepping stones for her own ambitions rather than giving a shit. For own children. Her own fucking children were glossed over and ignored in favor of her dream, which was ironic in of itself with how she waved off and downright insulted some of how her children looked. Which was the exact thing she wanted to avoid in Toto Land, discrimination. She gave more of a shit towards her people and subjects rather than her own children. And it took one of her sons being kidnapped in order for her to wake the fuck up and realize the sack of shit she had been towards her spawns. Did she deserve to even to reach for her goals or even try and meet the giants? Does she even deserve to be a mother? And the memories came flooding like a tsunami carrying needles and shrapnel in its waves that slammed into her full force. Memories before Luffy's kidnapping, memories where she was still a bitch, memories which eats away at her soul with guilt. But one memory stood out among the rest. Katakuri's mouth had been stretched wide open back when he was 3 and when some of her children and herself were still on the Rocks pirate's ship. She ignored her donut-loving son who was trying to give an explanation as to why his mouth ended up like that towards her, which was poorly cleaned off with the blood still visible. She had immediately assumed back at the time that he accidentally stuffed too many donuts into his mouth due to his fast-eating habits and it just ripped, and she turned deaf to his cries of reasoning while throwing a needle and some string at her son and told him to stitch it up and went off to the nearest bed to lay down on. She didn't even fucking bother to comfort him or try to listen to him. Looking back at it again, the words that she did pick up from Katakuri back then just kept repeating inside of her head, which was joined with many voices of anguish and sorrow from her own children that cried to their mother for any form of help which she didn't offer back them. Bastard, knife, sliced open. It wasn't because of him obsessively eating, it was because a fucking crewmate went and sliced his mouth open. And it took Luffy's birth and her trying to redeem herself did she finally start to see the many forms of suffering and pain that her children been put through, especially the older ones. It took almost 30 fucking years for her to finally realize why her son's mouth had actually been split open when he was 3. And it was obvious in plain sight if she even bothered to look at the scar on her son's face, with said scar looking like it was done with a sharp object rather than looking like it was ripped open. And he was just one of many of the eldest that she neglected. Again, she internally asked, did someone like her deserve to be a mother for what she did? But it was joined with even more depressing thoughts. Would her own children smile brighter if she was gone? Did she even deserve to be alive for being a horrendous excuse for a mother? Did her parents abandon her because they knew she was bound to turn into the monster she had now become? An invisible aura of depression and sorrow slowly started surrounding her. Her breathing got heavier and the grip on her arm was tighter to the point it looked like she could rip a chunk off by how hard she was clutching it. The light in her eyes dimmed a bit before going dead. Her orange eyes seemed to darken like the sun was going down. Her children tensed a bit before frowning and also having a depressing aura around them when they realized what was going on, although it wasn't as bad as their mothers right now. Luffy, on the other hand, looked on in silent shock at Lin Lin. Back when he was a child, he could read people's emotions and their nature pretty damn well, which he never really questioned much of and just wrote it off as good instincts. He knew who was good and bad or sad and happy. Ace was the first person he had come across who looked so lonely before he later met Sabo, who was also lonely, just like him. He made a vow to become their friends and later their brother, which he did not expect but was glad and happy it happened, and he brought them out of their sad states much to both of his older brother's gratefulness and happiness for. And then there was his mother's sudden severe depressing state. She was in a far worse state than Pudding, Sabo, or Ace. After a couple of seconds, Big Mom slowly stood up with her expression hidden with her head low and hair covering her face. I'm going to lie down in a room for a bit, she muttered out emotionlessly. Oh okay, Smoothie said with a rare stutter in her voice while looking down with her arms dangling down. She felt a pang in her heart from looking at the state her mother was in and how she could not do jack shit in helping her. The children also looked down or away while showing various degrees of negative emotions. After their mother left the deck and descended down towards the lower parts of the ship, they were left in an awkward and depressing silence, as if they were at a funeral. What's wrong with Mama? Luffy broke the silence with a surprisingly unexpected soft and quiet tone. He tilted his head towards his siblings with a frown on his face. That was Mama's depression state. Luffy turned back to see Cracker and Snack, who came out from where their mother was and also looked quite down about it. They knew from how their mother was acting when they met at the stairs. Their mother stopped moving when Cracker and Snack were in her way before she quietly and softly told them to move out of the way, to which they did, much to their shock that turned to sadness when they realized the state she was in. Depression state. Cracker nodded while Snack stepped forward to explain further. Mama's depression state is when she starts to relapse and remember what she was like after you were born, Snack said after thinking when the depression phase started. It was something the Charlottes hated and felt sad for whenever it happened. It was worse than her hunger pangs, because at least they knew that they needed some specific food to stop her hunger pangs. But her depression state was something the siblings couldn't snap their mother out of. They wanted to comfort her, but they couldn't. Mama's guilt and sorrow was beyond heartbreaking to see, but they couldn't approach to help her make her feel better. She had already made amends to them by being better, but in her eyes, it seemed she didn't do much with how she still has visible guilt in her eyes whenever she gazes at them. They didn't know how the hell they were supposed to comfort her when she sees them as her victims. If she made eye contact with one of them, she would get startled and moved back, and her eyes would start to get watery before telling them to go away, which they hesitantly obeyed. If they disobey and chose to move forward, she would back up into a corner, slump down and hug her knees, rock back and forward while repeating over and over again, "I'm a monster, stay away." It pained them even more when she quietly added she didn't want to hurt them anymore, and quietly cry while getting rid of the tears in a poor attempt to hide them from her children's sight. She looked so weak, vulnerable, sad, lonely, dead. We managed to break the prisoners and make them spill everything. We know where their main base of operations is located at, Snack said, trailing off in deep thought about what their next approach should be. But it's pretty far, in considering Mama's state. We should head home and prepare to attack them when Mama recovers, although they will be probably prepared for our arrival when their group doesn't report back. The Charlottes looked at each other and silently agreed to turn the ship around and set off back to Totoland ASAP. They needed to go home quickly, for Mama's sake. The only sounds heard and made while they sailed back was the muffled cries of a guilt-ridden mother and a silent spark of determination that lit up inside their rubber brother. Chapter 17. Heading back home was quite miserable with how their mother was sobbing all the way through. The Charlottes present on deck were grimacing and frowning while hearing their mother cry her heart out with guilt in her voice. The younger ones were going teary-eyed, worried about their mother with their older siblings, comforting them, telling them Mama will be okay in reassurance. Upon anchoring in the port, they just went back to the whole cake castle in silence while their mother loomed behind them, just staring down at the floor with her hair covering her facial expression. The citizens were quite shocked by the depressive aura that surrounded their queen, along with her children. Upon entering the castle, Big Mom just ignored her servants' greetings and went straight to her bedroom, much to their confusion, until Katakuri told them about the state she was in, which caused them to frown in understanding of the situation, with the higher-ranking servants giving orders to follow the protocols and instructions given when this situation popped up. The Charlottes were now gathered inside the dining room with the servants asking them if they wanted anything, which they immediately rejected. They didn't have much of an appetite, considering the situation right now. After dismissing the servants to have a personal discussion amongst themselves, no words were uttered after the doors closed. Until, "What was Mama like before I got kidnapped?" Luffy, after a couple of seconds of silence, asked while tilting his head and frowning over Mama's depression. At this question, Galette, Poire, and the Charlottes below or near their age also were curious about that matter. Mama treated them kindly when they were kids, but when Luffy's kidnapping happened, she still was kind and caring to them and all, but it felt more sincere and more affectionate. The older ones, on the other hand, stiffened at that question, especially the long-necked quadruplets, the eldest triplets, along with Compote and Perospero. They sailed with Rocks before Mama became a captain of her own crew. The Rocks were brutal, with how they always fight and kill each other on deck out of pure boredom when they aren't plundering or attacking something the captain had his eyes on. And even if they were children, they still had to keep their guard up and show no weakness if they wanted to stay. Katakuri found out the hard way when one carved his mouth. It was the first time Katakuri killed someone later out of anger and to protect his siblings for what The bastard did when he threatened and taunted him about how he would make sure he wouldn't feel alone by carving his other siblings too, which caused him to snap and become bloodthirsty, with a mix of protectiveness. It was a very different time back then, Katakuri said. Mema was pretty gluttonous and greedy. She would normally never share candy nor sweets with us when we reached 13, only when she was in a good mood or when we were starving would she even bother sharing some of her sweets to us, which was rare in itself. We would normally just go out and buy our own sweets and candy to enjoy. Perospero said with eyes closed without ending his words, without his usual pero or peroin at the end. She was a far cry to who she was now, a more affectionate and caring mother. Never annoyed or angered when one of them asked for sweets from her own plate, which she gave with a smile, sometimes even insisting on them trying some candy from her own plate and even her own stash. We found out from Struzen that Mama was abandoned by her own parents before being adopted by Caramel, before she and along with other orphans just disappeared from her. Somehow, because of this, Mima never was taught morales, what was right or wrong was something she didn't give a shit about. She ended up becoming quite cruel and neglectful to us and to her own subordinates because of that. Compote said, clutching her other arm in reminiscent. She was born as a mellowed-down version of her mother, an absurdly strong body with strength to boot with it. Appearance-wise, apart from her choice of clothes and different hair and eye color, she looked like a shrunken-down version of Big Mom around her 30s, even though she was nearly in her 50s. Now, Compote chalked it up to Mama's genetics or her devil fruit meddling with their appearances, considering Mama herself didn't seem to age. The giant woman was in her 60s, but she still looked around her 30s. Hell, she still looked the same from Compote's childhood until now, although she did start showing signs of changing when Mama was in her 40s, but it didn't seem like aging. It looked like her appetite and gluttony had made her put on weight. Although after Luffy's kidnapping, Mama had locked herself in a room for a week straight in isolation, where they could hear her sobs and cries slowly getting quieter and quieter as the hours and days go by. She finally came out when her hunger became too much to bear after being deprived of food for a week straight. Compote and her siblings, who saw their mother finally coming out of her room after a week, were horrified, pale and worried when they saw Mama's state. They could see her bones visibly underneath her dress and skin. That was how skinny she had become. After finally being fed, the day after that horrifying and extremely rare sight of Mama starving, Big Mom's usual ravenous hunger for food mellowed down drastically, everything tasting sour and bitter to her, and the change of taste were one of many things Mama developed after the accident, going from usually 5 to 10 plates filled to the brim with food that were stacked on top of each other at a steady pace, turned down to a moderate amount of 2 to 3 plates, which she goes through at a very slow pace. Compote even sometimes sees her mother struggling to digest or even eat during breakfast, lunch and dinner during the first few months. Compote shook her head when she felt her facial expression slowly turning into a look of grimace from the memories, and went back to the topic about Mama's youth. Her devil fruit allows her to replenish or add on to her lifespan via the souls of those who are unfortunate enough to cross her path and tick her off. Maybe some excess lifespan from Mama was passed down into Compote along with her siblings, thus making them age slowly but not as slow as their mother. Compote mentally shrugged that theory off before looking down at her hands. Just like Mama, she had been gifted with monstrous physical strength. And just like her, she didn't know how to control her strength when she was a child. She would accidentally break cups if she puts a bit of strength into it, rip doors from their hinges if she slammed them too hard, but the worst thing she did was break Perospero's ribs when she hugged him a little too hard. She cried like a little bitch and worried like hell when he coughed up blood while reassuring he was perfectly fine, with a smile on his face, saying he just drank an entire bottle of ketchup, which he coughed up in surprise over how she hugged him and how the cracking sound was someone snapping a piece of broccoli to eat it and not his bones. Even though she was still a child, she was neither a dumbass nor naive about how Perospero was trying not to make her feel guilty, which was a very sad and poor attempt, like stabbing a person, and they reassure the stabber that they did nothing wrong. The supposed ketchup had a metallic smell which she was 99.99% sure it was not supposed to have, and there was no broccoli in the storage room. She had checked after all, courtesy of her boredom and hunger, which made her steal pieces of food, and generally because fuck the rocks pirates, but Perospero still kept denying about it. Well, until he passed out, that is. Due to this, She never cradled nor carried her siblings who were still babies in fear of accidentally crushing them to death until she eventually learned to control her own strength, which she did at the age of 12. When she asked her mother for help before she mastered her control and strength, she waved off her request while confidently saying, "If I could figure it out myself, you definitely can. You are my child after all," to which she did with great fucking difficulty. In fact, Mima not only ignored her but her other younger siblings too, saying she has other matters to attend to, or was brutally honest by saying she didn't give a shit about what they accomplished, only if what they did helped her own endeavors rather than theirs. Sure, she had been honest, but damn, maybe she could have lied a bit or left out some details from her sentences back then. Well, at least she now has genuine affection and her attention for them with how she drops whatever she is doing whenever we walk up and talk to her. Compot internally thought in relief. But even so, she still had some genuine affection for us, which she denied a lot back then. Amande said with a small smile on her face while touching her hat, their mother might have been cruel and sometimes harmful towards them back when they were still children, but even so she still had some shred of warmth in her heart. The long-neck woman remembered when she was a teenager, she woke up at night and left her room to get a glass of water. Walking off to the kitchen, she went off into the corridor and saw something interesting. The library door slightly opened with light peeking through. As the curious child that she was, she went up and took a look inside, and when she did, she had to put her hand over her mouth to suppress her gasp of surprise. There, sitting on a chair while humming peacefully, was her mother, sewing a massive hat along with 3 other smaller hats on a table. And finally, Linlin reached out for a couple of flowers that were strung together before putting it on top of the large hat. There. Amande was again surprised by the genuine joy in her tone and face. She had never seen Mama smiled so sincerely or so genuinely before. Amande decided she had seen enough before going to the kitchen for a drink and proceeded to head back to her bedroom and slept. Although it was hard to sleep with that scene of her mother making a hat stuck in her head, playing on repeat. And when she woke up, she again was taken aback the 3rd time when said hat Mama was working on was lying on her bed with a red ribbon tied to it. She found a tag which labeled, "To Charlotte Amande. Wear it. Someone you know." Mama was making a present just for her late at night. She was too surprised to even notice the tears in her eyes. She hugged the hat close to the chest and slightly smiled. She thought Mama never cared for them. But here was the proof of her love, even if it wasn't much, although she would have never known if she stayed asleep. She truly cared about them. And it wasn't just her reminiscing about a gift from Mama. Mondi, Hachi, and Effiler touched their hats too with a soft look. Amande was the one who told them about who gave them their gifts, which would have sounded ridiculous if it was anyone else. Yeah. The other older Charlottes nodded, before they chorused as one. She has changed for the better. The younger siblings looked in awe over the emotions displayed on their older brothers' and sisters' faces. They looked so relief, happy, smiles that they don't usually see on the stoic ones were there for all to see in the dining room. Luffy looked in awe before smiling, and decided to sneak off under their noses. Pudding was smiling over the emotional moment before taking small glances to see her other siblings' reaction, and found Luffy missing. Pudding called out to all of them, which got their attention. "What? Where's Luffy-san?" "Hey." "Shit." At Big Mom's bedroom. Big Mom was curled up in her bed crying quietly but heavily, with Prometheus, Zeus, who were looming over her sadly while taking a glance at each other, and Napoleon, who was placed on the bedside table looking worried for Mama. It had been like this once Mama stepped into her room and walked directly towards her bed. They tried to speak to her, but when they made a sound, she would jump a bit and started shaking, which had silenced them. As homies who were always by Mama's side since their creation, they felt like utter shit seeing their mother in such a sorrowful state. They felt so useless. They could do nothing but fucking stare at her and worry and not comforting her like they want to. And what they were staring at right now was their mother going through a plethora of emotions. If they try and talk, it seemed she reacted by getting anxious and begin shaking a lot more than she previously was, while mumbling even more incoherently about something which made them back off in fear of getting an even more frantic reaction out of her. They took glances at the door, hoping for a miracle that someone opened the door. Someone who could get rid of Mama's sorrow. And their prayers were answered in the form of someone who definitely could. Big Mom's POV. Linlin was staring at her hands, which were shaking heavily while in a deep abyss of thoughts. Throughout her life, she wanted to create a place where all are unified and living happily. Amongst the other races, a land that was a dream. An Eden. And she did make the Eden. Sure, even though there were still a few races missing, it was a haven for all. But she had been a snake. She was like a wolf among sheep, a peaceful place where the peaceful habitants shared their residence with her, a natural-born monster. Most of the damages and casualties had been because of her hunger pangs rather than outside threats. She was a ticking bomb with no time counter nor any indication of when she would set off. And the worst part was said ticking bomb was surrounded by her children. The only thing she could do was open her eyes and witness the aftermath caused by her from her hunger pangs. It was only a month ago, where she opened her eyes after tasting some delicious pudding in her mouth, while surrounded by destroyed buildings. A month ago, where she was beyond horrified when she looked down and found her fist nearly making contact with Oven, who was using his body to protect his child siblings. He was going to sacrifice himself to save his siblings who were still 12 and under, from their own mother. She had been a mere second away from opening her eyes to find one of her oldest children, along with some of her other kids who hadn't reached 13 yet, lying dead on the floor, killed by what had she ever been good for besides destruction? Really? Was she born and made to be a being that destroys all that are close to her? Then a thought came to mind. A theory she had shoved to the bottom pits of her dark thoughts. Did she kill them? Did she kill her orphan friends alongside Mother Caramel? She started breathing heavier but was able to somewhat shove that theory back down and went back to her somewhat lighter but still heavy and dark thoughts. She was so deep in thought, she never saw how light started to shine in the room from the door. She forgot to lock it. Just like a fish biting a bait and getting reeled into the surface, she was pulled out of the black sea inside her mind by the words of a child. Her child. Mama. 1 or 2 minutes ago. Luffy walked up to the giant door and just opened it, not bothering to be quiet and subtle with it. Surprisingly, the door didn't even creak even with the strong push. He poked his head through the door while observing the inside while scanning around for where Mama was. Looking at the right corner, he spotted a huge mirror that was accommodated for her size. The mirror's frame had an elegant design made with silver. Shifting his gaze from the mirror, he looked further towards the right and saw a dressing table, along with several picture frames hanging above it. The pictures themselves display what looked like his siblings when they were younger messing around. But that wasn't what he was here for. Stepping further inside the room, he now looked at the left side and saw who he was looking for. Mema, who was accompanied by a sun, cloud, and a hat that made eye contact with him. Luffy tilted his head at the three homies who were giving a look of hope towards him with neither one of them breaking eye contact, and after a while, he smiled at them before he called out towards her. Present. Big Mom quickly wiped away her tears before she slowly looked up to see her son. Lu, FFY. Yo. Luffy just raised his hand to wave at her and noticed how she twitched her hands slightly at that. They stayed silent with Luffy just tilting his head towards her when he noticed how his giant mother was shaking a bit. Luffy was worried about the behavior his mother was displaying and walked forward. Oi, what's Rodash? Stay away. He stopped dead in his track looking a bit shocked before going back to his original expression. When she said that while also noticing how she was shaking more and moved a bit further away from him, Luffy stepped forward and she pushed herself back with her legs further on her bed in response. It continued until eventually Big Mom finally had her back touching the back of the wall and curled up while muttering something under her breath. Noticing her behavior becoming worse, Luffy became even more concerned. With one arm stretched and latching onto the bed frame, he yanked himself towards and onto the mattress with Zeus, Prometheus, and Napoleon looking towards him tensed at the situation. One wrong approach and a couple of poor choices of words could cause an eruption of very volatile emotions from Mama. And unfortunately for them, Luffy wasn't the type to tiptoe on a minefield. He is the kind of guy that would run around without giving much of a fuck of setting one off. Luffy stretched one arm and grabbed onto Mama's arm, and before she could react, he had already thrown himself towards her face and thud smacked against her forehead before falling on his ass, now sitting on one of her arms. The three homies witnessing this event just had a dumbfounded expression on their face. Linlin and Luffy just stared awkwardly. Linlin wasn't sure what to do. Normally her children would respectively keep their distance, but before she could think of what to do. Are you still sad about being a bastard to my brothers and sisters? Luffy asked bluntly while tilting his head with a serious expression on his face pointed at her all, the while crossed sitting on her arm with his arms and legs. Now the homies paled considerably with Zeus somehow getting whiter than he is. Of all things to say, they could only think of one thing about this situation, and it was Brew. Linlin at that flinch and tense painfully over her son's very poor choice of words to start this conversation. She averted her gaze from Luffy and looked downwards, feeling the shame and guilt for what she had done towards her own flesh and blood. Luffy took this as a sign of a yes and restrained a grumble in frustration. You sure are an idiot, you know. Zeus, Napoleon, and Prometheus didn't believe they could have their jaws hanging lower as they were now, but Luffy proved them wrong with that follow-up, a very fucking shitty one at that. 2. Oh, we are Bayong Fuyuked, aren't we? They thought as one. At that Linlin whimpered while slowly nodding. Yeah, she had been stupid. How could she make a safe haven where all could live happily when she attacked and neglected her own children? Why yeah, I had been a shit excuse of a mother wasn't dash. You aren't. Luffy shouted while sounding like he was whining simultaneously. Big Mom twitched in surprise before whipping her head to now make eye-to-eye contact with her son wide-eyed. Are you still ignoring them? Luffy asked, tilting his head in confusion. It was like talking with Jinbei all over again. Now Big Mom gaped before raising her voice slightly to respond. No. Are you mean to them? He now lied on his side, propped up on one elbow with his hand, supporting his head without breaking eye contact. Big Mom gritted her teeth a bit and replied with her normal voice now. No. Are you cold to them? Luffy now raised an eyebrow at her, looking even more confused. Big Mom raised her voice a bit and replied with more emotion. No. So you love us? Luffy broke the serious expression on his face and smiled up at her, knowing what her response will be. Of course I do. Then how are you a shitty mother? Luffy finally asked the big question. She was about to say something, but found herself unable to. Linlin couldn't respond and just kept opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for air. She couldn't really find the words to retort against that statement. Luffy continued on while slowly getting onto his feet and standing up. If you were a shitty mother, then why do you pay attention to them? Why are you kind to them? Why are you warm to them? Why do you love them? Linlin widened her eyes a bit and went deep in thought, and for once it wasn't dark. And from those thoughts, she could only think of one thing. They are my children, why wouldn't I love them? For once, her thoughts could be heard out loud, which surprised herself. She never talked out loud what she was thinking. Luffy beamed up at her while also adding on. See, you are a good mother. But I still hurt them. Back then I dash. Mama Tilda, you already made up for that by apologizing to us and being better, Tilda. Linlin widened her eyes and looked behind Luffy, who also seemed surprised, and followed her gaze, and saw her long-legged daughter peeking her head behind the door while pouting a bit. She had never seen her daughter had such a childish expression since she hit 12. Smoothie. Another one of her child's head popped up from the door while looking grumpy. We already got over it and moved on. There's no point about being sad and shit over the past. Cracker. Asterisk bonk asterisk. That earned him a smack in the head with a candy staff, courtesy of the eldest child, which had Cracker dropping and rolling on the floor while holding his head in pain, which had his triplet sisters giggling with a hand over their mouths from behind. Indeed, Peroin Tilda, it's all in the past and you became better mama, and besides, all of us have forgiven, have you already? Perospero. The eldest just smiled and walked in further while waving behind him, which made the rest of the siblings to walk inside. Big Mom didn't what to say when all 86 children were gathered in her room while looking up at her. Faces of amusement, faces of happiness, faces of joy, faces of relief. Even some of her children who were cold, distant, and stoic had a positive look pointed right at her. Perospero wordlessly waved his staff and made a candy spiral stairway up to their mama's bed. Perospero walked up first before being followed by the rest of his siblings. Luffy, seeing his siblings coming towards them, just grinned before jumping down to walk up to them and went to Perospero's side, both youngest and eldest looking at each other, one with happiness pouring out of him, with the latter showing amusement and fondness while resting and rubbing the other's head, before raising and lightly chopping the youngest's head. You sure have an interesting choice of words to use when speaking with Mama Peroin Tilda. The long-tongued sibling sighing while his rubber brother just laughed in response. Perospero, along with the rest of his siblings, were outside of their mother's room, listening in on what their brother was saying to make their mother better. The amount of emotions they went Through was like experiencing the weather of the Grand Line. But, thanks for opening Mama's eyes. He finished softly with absolute sincerity and gratitude in his voice. At that, Luffy smiled brighter and shifted his gaze to Mama. See, you aren't a shitty mother. If you were a shitty mother, you wouldn't have changed for the better. And everyone already forgave you. Big Mom looked towards her children who were agreeing with him too. Her eyes started to become watery at that. Not out of sadness, but out of relief and joy. She always wondered if they have forgiven her. She understood if some don't, but to think all of her children had forgiven her. She couldn't help but feel warm inside. The siblings looked worried seeing their mother in tears but relaxed when they noticed she was smiling softly. Luffy looked at Big Mom, then at his siblings. Then towards Mama. Then towards his siblings. Then towards Mama. Then towards his siblings. He smiled, and anyone who looked towards their brother could almost see the light bulb lighting up above his head. He ran towards the back of the crowd of his siblings who all paid attention to him. Katakuri sighed while pinching his nose but looked amused seeing what he was going to do. Next, the siblings around noticed their elder brother sighing, but before they could ask why, Gomu no. They widened their eyes before looking behind them and paled. Luffy had his arms stretched and hanged onto the back of the bed frame behind Big Mom, who wiped her tears while looking curious on what her son was going to do. Before his siblings could protest or do anything about what he was going to do, Rocket. The siblings, along with their brother Luffy, were launched towards Big Mom, who, for the first time in her life, had a dumbfounded expression at seeing her children flying right at her. Quickly snapping out of her thoughts, she lowered and crossed her legs so her children could land in her lap. After landing into their mother's lap with some missing her entirely and slamming into either her pillow or the bed, Luffy just laughed while his siblings groaned while glaring at him lightly. Pudding, who landed next to him, huffed and pouted before pinching and stretching his cheek in annoyance over being launched towards Mama without warning. Some of the siblings who saw what Pudding mimicked her and started pinching and stretching his face to show they were clearly not amused by his actions. Luffy, with around 10 to 15 of his siblings stretching his face, started to smile sheepishly and started apologizing while scratching the back of his head even though his grin shows no signs of being genuinely sorry. Big Mom, seeing her son getting pinched by her other children, couldn't help but giggle softly and quietly in amusement which stunned her children. They have never heard her let out such an amused laugh before. Luffy, seeing her mother giggling, couldn't help but laugh along too. The siblings pinching him couldn't help but join in too, finding the situation funny. Then the rest of the siblings who were watching couldn't help but snicker a bit. Snickers and giggles slowly turned into full-blown laughter, even Katakuri along with his stoic siblings couldn't help but laugh lightly or snicker a bit. Mama, throughout her laughter, couldn't help but feel internally warm and completed. Years of sad and depressive thoughts, gone in an instant thanks to her son. After the laughter died down, Big Mom looked down towards her children and smiled warmly and gently. Yeah, they were right. She changed for the better. It's already dinner time. Everyone was broken out of their thoughts and stared at a surprised Mondior who was looking at his pocket watch. Poire walked up to his side and squinted at the watch in his hands before going wide-eyed. He was right, it was already about time. Hey, time sure passes by. Poire commented. It felt like minutes went by, not hours. Big Mom motioned for her children to get off her lap, to which they did so their mother could get up from her bed. Wordlessly going towards the door, she swung it right open and turned around. She looked at her children with a soft and gentle look on her face and uttered 2 words that were filled with affection and love. Let's go. And her children responded as one with the same feeling as hers. Yes, Mama. But before they could leave for dinner, all of the Charlottes, including Big Mom, looked towards 11-year-old Wafers who stood timidly. When all of her siblings and Mama's eyes were on her. What's wrong? Smoothie asked. About what Krakenee said earlier. The siblings tensed heavily while the mentioned sweet general froze in fear. What does shit mean? Wafers asked innocently while tilting her head in curiosity towards Cracker, who looked like he was diagnosed by a doctor with an unknown lethal disease. The siblings froze before looking towards their mother, who smiled, but they could see Conqueror's haki leaking out of her. They wisely backed away, with Poire hugging and moving a confused Luffy wrapped in her arms, and kept their distance from Cracker while offering a quick prayer. Now the question was, how bad was he going to get it from Mama? Second Sweet Commander and Minister of Biscuits, Charlotte Cracker. Ow. That bad. YYYSMMMR. He replied sounding like a little bitch and they couldn't blame him. You have a 5-second head start. Run. Yes, mama. AON. Good news, internship is over. I can write frequently again. Also, been seeing some people ask, from fanfiction, for me to write another fanfiction that is a reading my fanfic kind of story. To that, if anyone feels like it, you have my permission to write a reading a reaction of my fanfiction till I finish this story and write my own. Besides that, yeah, I'ma move on to writing chapter 18 now. Chapter 18. Dinner was very peaceful and quiet. But that was mainly because many of the siblings couldn't help but just stare silently at Cracker, who was slumped on the table looking like a corpse. It was pretty awkward to eat their food while staring at their brother who kept opening and closing his mouth, but he was too quiet for most of them to hear what he was saying if he even was uttering sound at all. For those who were close enough to hear him muttering to himself, however, they couldn't help but let a sweat drop at him. Never swear at the children. Never forget. Never swear at the children. Never forget. He had kept repeating that line like a broken snail recorder when Mama caught him and dragged him off to God knows where, with Cracker desperately trying to get his grip onto the floor and screaming like never before while being dragged away. He had tried to run away, but he never had a chance to run away. Mama was playing around with him by giving him a glimpse of hope with a head start. But you just can't outrun someone who can use Soru repeatedly. The fact that Mama also could be so fast and quick on her feet without Soru nor the help of Zeus carrying her was scary as hell. It was a terrifying sight to witness, seeing their mother straight up teleport in front of him and started chasing him down, slowly walking like she was taking a stroll in the park before full-on sprinting at speeds only professional giant athletes could try and reach. It was like Admiral Kizaru snorted white lines instead of smoking whatever kind of joint he is always high on, and started talking at normal speed. Not to mention whatever punishment Mama dished out for him. Anyone on Whole Cake Island who could hear the screams of the poor sweet general shuddered and felt a chill going down their spine. Alright, Tilda Snack, where is the main base of operations of those scumbags? Oh, and do go over the events of today so far. Snack looked startled a bit before dawning a serious look on his face, although for the more observant siblings, they could see him take a quick glance at Cracker and shot him a look of pity, before quickly looking back at Mama. Yes, we intercepted one of their ships which were led by the right-hand man of the organization. They were coming from around the southeast of Cheese Island and were planning to go from Cheese Island to Biscuit Island, and they finally would try to invade Whole Cake Island and try to finish off or capture our weakened forces. Many of the siblings, including Snack himself, couldn't help but snort in amusement at that. As if sending weaklings after weaklings could weaken them or even make them tired. Babysitting their siblings when they were still toddlers were more of a challenge than them. After a conversation with our guests, their main base of operation wasn't around the southern parts of Toto Land where they attacked from, but rather, they are further off west and slightly south from Daifukianiki's island. Snack then pulled out a Den Mushi projector, putting the map of the new world on the snail's left side, which made the snail glance at, which caused its right eye to project the map of the archipelago for all the siblings to see. Looking at the projected map, they focused on the red circle that centered around an island that was between Mogaro Kingdom and Toto Land, but it was more towards their archipelago rather than the kingdom. Did they spill about anything besides the location? What about their forces? Smoothie asked. Yes, they have stated how they are 300 men strong, and as for the big shots they have, out of the 300, they have 10 people with 100 million beri on their heads. Besides that, the only person we should be cautious about is their captain with a bounty over 600 million beri on their head. At that, the siblings hummed in acknowledgement. Judging by the map and distance, it would take us about 3 days to get there. Lauren commented while leaning back into his seat while crossing his arms. Yeah, it should, Snack replied while shrugging. It's a pretty rough estimate. Big Mom hummed while getting her mind working on the next course of action. During these couple of months, the only thing they had to worry about were invasions by these organ harvesting idiots. Besides that, there hadn't been much trouble that had been reported towards her, nor have her children seen or have received reports of anything truly troubling or problematic. In the islands under them, only some minor, only noteworthy reports personally to her and some of her children were some poor young brats that were either kicked off from their families, alone as their parents died, or runaways that escaped from their abusive parents and came here instead. Fortunately, they have an orphanage owned by Perospero in Candy Island, where he properly educates and takes care of them, alongside Compote, who loved kids, with Panna and Broy sometimes coming to the place to play with them. The others just stop by to check on their elder brother and sometimes entertain. The orphans, the siblings with devil fruits, use their abilities for tricks to amaze them. Besides that, the crime rate had decreased over time in the past 1.5 decades, with the homeless, subordinates or her children roaming the streets and making sure the peace is maintained. She was confident that she could entrust her subordinates and maybe an increase of homeless patrolling to make sure any shit doesn't stir while she and her children were gone for about maybe 2 or 3 days. Bobbin, Tamago, and Peekums were the major reasons as to why she was that confident. But they would be gone for 6 days, 3 to get there and 3 to come back, and that's not including the time it would take to destroy and wreak carnage on their base. If they travel by boat, that is 2 hours. It will take us 2 hours. At that, the siblings looked towards their mother, who looked quite confident over that statement. 2 hours to get there? Pudding asked innocently while tilting her head. No. 30 minutes to get there, an hour to slaughter them, and another 30 minutes to come back. The younger siblings were surprised but were curious as to how they would be able to get there in such a significantly short amount of time, while the older siblings knew what Mama was thinking about and looked towards her homie Zeus in childhood nostalgia. They remembered how they would fly high in the sky on him, and sometimes, if they asked or when anyone wasn't looking, Zeus would travel at higher speeds to entertain them. It was fun as hell for some, a scary and terrifying moment for others. We are going to ride on Zeus and fly towards them, aren't we? Brulee asked with excitement in her tone, which caused a couple of the older siblings to sweat drop at her, remembering their childhood. She was normally the one who excitedly asked Zeus to keep going faster and faster, while laughing cheerfully in glee at the speed they were going at. Some of her siblings either cheered on or screamed and nearly pissed themselves over the fear of falling off from the ludicrous speeds Zeus was flying at. Broy would normally cling onto her and scream in terror with tears in her eyes, while Brulee would scream in excitement with stars in her eyes when Zeus zoomed from island to island around Toto Land in less than an hour, sometimes taking a couple of minutes if he pushed his limits a bit. Zeus lit up at that while looking towards Mama, who nodded towards him, which caused him to beam. It's been a real long time since he could finally fly around with people riding him at fast speeds. Big Mom then looked back towards Brulee and nodded. Yes, we are. We shall fly and hover above their base and drop down at their port first if they have one, then we will make our way towards the other end of the island or their base while looking around and killing any pests. She was interested to see if there was anything noteworthy to steal from them, be it devil fruits, new ingredients, or whatever seemed interesting and caught either her or the children's eye. She wanted to start off from the port and make their way towards their base while either eliminating their forces or taking anything interesting. She was going to take everything they had and set an example on why it isn't a good idea to annoy them. We shall depart and leave 20 minutes from now. Bring whatever you need and let's thoroughly enjoy slaughtering them all. Tilda. Yes, Mama. The children all stood up at once, with Cracker being assisted and guided by his sisters out of the room and left to prepare in their own ways. Luffy stood up while looking around, wondering what the hell he should do until Ewan patted him on the shoulder. Luffy hummed in curiosity and turned towards his brother, who smiled at him. Ewan was interested to know more about Luffy, about something. You don't got anything to do, right, you? Nope. All right. Let's go and have a chat. Okay. Ewan turned and walked with Luffy trailing behind while they had a stupid smile or grin plastered onto their faces and went off at Ewan's room. The room itself was pretty big to accommodate for Ewan's size and looked like any other normal room in an average house. They were sitting on the bed with Ewan and Luffy sitting on the opposite ends of the bed. Luffy crossed his legs looking at Ewan while Ewan had his back onto the wall and laid there. Ewan wanted to talk to Luffy because he needed to know something that had been bothering him from listening to their brother telling tales of his adventures. He had picked up on something during Luffy's stories and that one conversation about his crew. It felt like there was always details that were left out when he talked. His crewmates, for example. It felt like there was an even bigger picture behind the backgrounds of his crewmates that he left out, but that wasn't the reason he dragged him. What he wanted to talk about was Luffy. Did you ever use haki before the Marineford fiasco went down you? How he never mentioned using haki during his journey. Not a single time has he heard him say anything about defeating people with armament haki nor any signs of using conqueror's haki. Sure, he had never finished his story, but from how he talked about fighting a fishman, from the execution attempt from Buggy, from the newspaper talking about how their brother stormed Eni's lobby and defeated a top government agent and the fact he fought and defeated warlord Gecko Moria, which they learnt from Lola. All that, without haki. He could have defeated Arlong easily if he used haki and bashed him repeatedly until he was knocked out cold. He could have coated his neck in haki so Buggy couldn't decapitate him. He could have dealt with that Cypher Paul agent with ease with his armament and knock out most of the marine reinforcements with his conquerors. He could have gone toe-to-toe with Moria instead of relying on people. So why didn't he use haki? Not only that, but he was pretty sure he wasn't the only sibling who noticed how it felt like he skipped over a couple of details whenever he talked about either his journeys or about his crewmates. Luffy stared at Ewan for a sec before responding. Yeah, I did. At this, it intrigued Ewan. Who did you use haki on you? Crocodile. Crocodile. Ewan was shocked. He sometimes read the news after dinner while lying on his bed and had seen a particular headline that piqued his interest a few months back. Commodore Smoker defeats and arrests warlord Crocodile. It didn't make sense for a marine to go after a warlord, even more so for a commodore of all people to defeat Crocodile. After Crocodile's defeat, they looked into the Navy dog's background and history and found out he was originally stationed in Logetown as a captain. What a waste of resources to station someone like him in Logetown of all places. He clearly deserved a higher rank with his skills and power. He had potential to achieve more and should have been tasked with missions that accommodate for his strength. He doubted that his promotion would have existed if it wasn't for their brother's crew wreaking havoc around Paradise, causing the marine dog to chase them. But that was the Navy's problem, not theirs. But even so, he wasn't at the level to deal with someone like Crocodile, not yet anyway. That task was more suited for either an admiral or several vice-admirals. He didn't know Luffy was their brother at the time, but if he had known, he would have connected the dots on how Crocodile was defeated when he noticed at the bottom of the headline, mentioning the Straw Hats also coincidentally being at Arabasta too. But did he? Any Luffy, did you know about this? Ewan stood up from his bed and bent over to grab a box underneath the bed, opening the box. He rummaged through several issues of News Coup newspaper that have piqued his interest and kept them to read when he got bored, before finding the one about Crocodile's defeat. Handing it to Luffy, he saw how his brother looked at the newspaper for a few seconds before going wide-eyed. Welp, that is 100% a look of a person that recently discovered something he should have known a long time ago. You didn't know you? No, but my bounty went up to 100 million after beating his ass. His face went from shock to cheerful when talking about his bounty. At least his bounty still increased, and he still was gonna become the Pirate King. But I didn't really use it that often. Luffy added on, he only slightly used haki to either punch Crocodile a few feet back when he almost impaled him with his hook, but luckily he coated a part of his chest with armament underneath his vest in time, even though he still grabbed and slammed him into the sand and buried him, or when Crocodile grabbed him by the neck and dehydrated him, but he was able to kick him in time before he was dehydrated to a near-death state, and also when he was finally defeating him, he sometimes threw a haki-coated punch that was mixed with blood-soaked arms. Why not you? Ewan asked. It would have made things way easier if he did. I made a promise to Shanks, Luffy said before lying down on the bed and looking up at the ceiling while remembering about the man. What was it about? Ewan asked, interested while not looking fazed by the mention of the Yonko. Tamago did mention how the Yonko had good relations with Luffy. About how I should only really use haki if I fight someone super strong and make sure not a lot of people see it too. But when I reach the new world, I could go all out. Luffy said, grinning. He also saw it as a challenge when he taunted him about it too, saying he bet he needed to use haki all the time when fighting because he was weak without it. That damn tomato. Heh, is that so you? Ewan said while tilting his head. Sounded like a challenge that was given to Luffy from the Yonko. It also would help make Luffy be seen less of a threat if the people who knew about his haki was kept at a minimum, which painted less of a target on him, although that secret was blown out of The water with the broadcast of Marineford that fully displayed Luffy annihilating the 3 admirals. Honestly, he could fool anyone with how he looks like a kid before he absolutely destroys them in a fight, so that probably helped make him look less menacing too. Luffy hummed at that, which Ewan took as a yes. Looking around his brother's room, he saw his bounty poster on the left nailed on the wall with what seemed like previous bounties behind it too. Wanted. Dead or alive. Charlotte Ewan. 160,500,000. Any, how did you get your bounty? Luffy asked while pointing towards Ewan's bounty poster. Ah, that was when Marines came to bring us to justice blah blah blah, send us to impel down. Where we belong blah blah blah, and whatever crap they spewed you, he huffed when remembering about that day. A bunch of Marine battleships led by several vice and rear admirals came around half a year ago to try and capture one of them for justice or whatever kind of bullshit that came out of their mouths. Till this day, he is still baffled on why they haven't grabbed an admiral, because he was certain their chances would go up if they bothered to bring one. Who the hell are the higher-ups that planned and orchestrated this was a question he has been waiting for an answer for. They kept rambling and rambling on, and it got really annoying before I got annoyed and attacked first. I moonwalked above them before absolutely annihilating a battleship with this Ewan said while proudly holding his staff that had an orb on its tip. The ball on this staff can expand to about the size of Opera-San and hits like a cannonball. With a swing Ewan said enthusiastically before standing up and raising his staff above his head while Luffy just oot in amazement. With my orb at its maximum size, I slammed it into the deck of the battleship with that annoying bastard and it exploded Ewan motioned his staff in a way that showed how he slammed it while Luffy just kept looking amazed. If anyone were to open the door to see what was going on inside, they would have probably immediately closed the door and walk away with a confused expression on their faces on what the fuck those two were doing. Ewan then laid back on the bed. And after that, the rest of us just absolutely massacred them afterwards. They were dumbass for thinking they could take us on The only smart decision they made was retreating before the casualties increased even more. Overall, it was pretty good combat experience for me and the siblings around my age. The Marines went from 300 men strong, which included 3 rear admirals and 6 vice admirals and several seamen and officers of various ranks, to a crippling casualty of 97 dead, 80 wounded, 67 crippled for life, and 56 captured to be either tortured, interrogated, or a generous donation towards Mama's soul supply. Unfortunately, no dead vice nor rear admirals for the Charlottes, but they finally realized that retreating was better than fighting a losing battle. On their side were numerous replaceable chess homes consisting of 150 pawns, 75 bishops, 75 knights, and 50 rooks. The younger siblings partaking in this battle were Ewan, Raisin, Jokund, Mascarpone, and Joscarpone, who were followed by their older and more experienced siblings. Morne Dior, Galette, Poire, Melisse, Saint Mark, Basskarte, Cinnamon, High Fat, Mozart, Mash, and, just in case they needed more backup, Brulee. The only one wounded was Raisin, but that was because he let his guard down against a vice admiral when a rear admiral came up behind and attacked him, left a bit of a scar when he turned towards the bastard and took the slash to his chest, but nothing terrible. To the Marines it was a fight for justice. For them, it was pretty good combat exercise and helped them give ideas on what to improve on. Ewan smiled in nostalgia over the moment the Marines realized they fucked up big time messing with them. Glancing at the clock, he stood up and walked towards the door. All right, it's time let's go. Luffy nodded and followed behind him. Yeah. Now, he can't wait to see the terror and horror plastered on those damn organ harvesters next, when they drop down on them. At the rooftop of Whole Cake Castle, Katakuri, along with Daifuki, Oven, Perospero, Compote, and Hachi were already present 5 minutes earlier. The sweet commander stood tall, with a pouch of beans and a little time with himself and his beloved donuts till he was ready. Taking a glance towards a table surrounded with the other 5 siblings with him, Compote, Perospero, and Daifuki were enjoying tea while Hachi and Oven had a cup of coffee with them. He looked towards the entrance towards the rooftop and was guessing when they would come. Here, Hachi other sisters, Amande, Mondi, and Effiler, prefer to come on time. Knowing Brulee and Broy, Brulee would come earlier than Broy, probably excited with the aspect of riding on Zeus again, and probably would try and get him to fly at extreme speeds. Even Though she is in her 40s, she could be childish at times. While Broy was probably trying to mentally prepare herself, she wasn't one that could handle moving on a fast-moving vehicle, or in this case, homie after all. Cracker would be interesting to guess. He wondered when he would come around and recover. From whatever Mama did to him, he most likely would come with his triplet sisters because they was snapping him out of it. The quintuplets would come without opera. The man himself would probably be busy reading a comic book again, and by the time he realized it was time, he would arrive around 1 to 5 minutes. Later than the agreed time, depends on how fast he runs and panics. He could guess accurately what time, what activities or shenanigans his siblings around his age are up to. The younger ones, though, are pretty hard to read considering he doesn't really interact with them. He was too busy playing the part of a dependable, strong, perfect brother. Although he was interested in wondering what Ewan and Luffy were talking about, it's pretty rare for Ewan to bring someone into his room for a chat. Normally he preferred talking to them on the spot. Must have been really important if he wanted a more private location to converse whatever subject he was interested on with Luffy. After some time passed, he accurately guessed that Brulee came looking quite positive and energetic, like a kid finally getting a chance to ride a roller coaster, while Broy followed behind. Looking slumped, even with the 20 minutes to prepare herself, she did not look prepared to ride on Zeus. It was now time. Amande, Mondi, and Effiler, Ewan and Luffy along with most of the other siblings started coming in with Mama following behind. Big Mom stood at the front of the group while looking like she was doing a head count. After a few seconds passed, Cracker with his sisters finally came, although they could see a red handprint on the sweet commander's face which raised some eyebrows. The giant woman made sure to count the triplets before thinking. Where's your brother, Opera? She asked while looking at the present quintuplets. He's busy reading that comic book of his, Gala said while stroking his beard while the 3 other brothers nodded alongside him. Galette, Morn Dior, and those close to the minister face-palmed. Of course he was busy with something unimportant, and you didn't bother telling him it was about time. She raised an eyebrow over them which caused them to look sheepish. To be fair, he told us not to disturb him and he promised to be a few seconds late. Cadenza said helpfully, although it was now longer than a mere few seconds. Big Mom was about to say something before the men himself came busting through the doors, looking a bit panicked. I was busy, Fa. Just join with your other siblings. Yes, Mama. And with that, everyone was present. All right, Zeus. Expand. Yes, Mama. The mentioned homie nodded and expanded to the size of the rooftop and stationed besides the rooftop. Big Mom was the first to step on Zeus before being followed by the others. As soon as everyone got on board of Zeus, the cloud homie immediately departed. Big Mom turned towards her children with a sweet, sinister grin. All right, listen up. We will drop down on them and as soon as we land, take out anyone who are not your siblings. We will start from their port or beaches and make our way towards the other end of the island. Make sure the last moments of their lives are filled with terror and horror. Tilda. Yes, Mama. Like a student towards a teacher, Panna raised her hand which Mama took notice of. Yes, dear. What will this operation be called? At that Big Mom was thinking. They were seen as devils and monsters. Sometimes the females of the family were called witches, most prominent being Melisse and Brulee, and they were attacking them at night. They will be raining down, bringing pain and death towards them. Racking her brain, she looked at her children before she lit up. We shall call this operation. Chapter 18. After leaving the archipelago, Panna poked Ewan's shoulder to get his attention. Ewan, what did you and Luffy talk about? She said while slowly moving her finger to poke. His left cheek, Ewan's expression lit up while being unaffected by her older sister's poking and Luffy turned towards Panna and hummed when he heard his name. I picked up something about his battles, you. The siblings and Mema raised their heads, before slowly turning towards Ewan and Panna curiously. What about them? He never talked about using haki at all, you. This raised some eyebrows and caused some to go wide-eyed before all slowly stared at their brother in either curiosity or slight amazement. Panna, on the other hand, just waved it off. He probably would have mentioned using haki somewhere down the line when he tells us more about his little adventure during Paradise, right? Panna said while turning and questioning Luffy at the last part. Only one time. Now that caused more eyebrows to be raised at his response. When you were fighting Gecko Moria then? Panna asked, tilting her head, her older sister Lola, did talk about how Luffy and his little group of pirates beat the warlord and freed her along with some other people, especially freeing and getting a new crewmate. Nah, he was strong but didn't need to use it against him. The siblings that were on the same thought along the lines of Panna were now surprised. Then who? Who forced you to use haki then? Crocodile. Ah, the warlord I so wait what? Panna was nodding as if that made sense before fully registering what her brother said and turning to look surprised. Mayukuru stepped up while raising an eyebrow at all her siblings, especially towards Luffy didn't. Some Commodore beat Crocodile. Ewan raised a finger to that statement, are about that. Ewan went to explain how it was bizarre and strange for a mere Commodore to defeat a warlord. Which they agreed, either that was due to Marine's incompetence to see one's potential to be higher ranked or the warlord had been slacking off and gotten weak over time, and also how in the newspaper it also mentioned Luffy along with his other fellow pirate mates being spotted in Arabasta during Crocodile's downfall. Even the siblings who weren't the brightest could see the picture of what really went down in Arabasta. That Commodore didn't beat Crocodile, it was Luffy, wasn't it? Effiler said what everyone was thinking about while glancing at Luffy. Yep. Probably would have been a public embarrassment for the government if word got out that a pirate crew had dealt with the mess rather than the Marines themselves. I can imagine the outrage, Mondior said thoughtfully while rubbing his chin, imagining the scenario. The Marines would have been viewed as an unreliable and an incompetent organization if the truth ever came to light. It would be way more troublesome considering Crocodile was given the position of warlord personally by the government too. Speaking of public embarrassment, how do you think the world is handling the news of the utter failure from the War of the Greats? Galette asked, which had Poire put a finger on her chin, being thoughtful about it. Now that you mention it, the entire world saw how it went down and how the Marines got absolutely annihilated by our little bro, yes. Poire said with a hint of pride and respect while looking at Luffy, especially with the main objective being to execute Roger's son, Ace being an utter failure fa. They took down Whitebeard, but it was either his decaying health and old age or fighting in Marineford that would have finished him off, fa. Opera said wisely. Although Luffy's display of power probably had more of an effect considering he was just considered some rookie from East Blue, and it turned out that said rookie from East Blue would be the biggest annoyance and obstacle in the Marines' plans here. Smoothie said while smiling. Towards Luffy, she wanted to spar with her brother to see how she can hold herself in a battle against him. Melise leaned forward while smiling sinisterly, a rookie along with some impelled down prisoners coming from the skies, defeating 3 admirals and castrating 1 for life, saving the son of the pirate king, and not to only mention escaping with said son that was supposed to be executed. Yeah, the public outrage and complaints of this utter devastating failure has to be quite the sight to see. Tilda. The rest also imagined it and can't help but see the public demanding answers on why they haven't eliminated that rookie earlier. He had broken and saved the devil child form Ennie's lobby, while defeating a Cypher Paul agent after all. That should have raised some eyebrows towards him. But they wrote him off as the same as the rest of the supernovas. Snack snorted before grinning. Imagine how the world would react if said rookie turned out to not only be the child of Dragon, but turned out to be the son of Mama as well when we finally reveal it. At that they can't help but crack smiles or grins at that image. Oh, the panic that would surge through the world when the day finally arrives. Luffy looked confused at why his siblings were smiling or giggling to themselves before shrugging and lying down on the fluffy cloud. Mama is Luffy's Mama, so what if the world finds out? Unfortunately, there still hasn't been a single person who told him about his mother's status and position and how her bounty was 4 times bigger than his. Rayleigh figured that someone would have talked about how Luffy's mother is kind of a big deal. But nope, there hasn't been a single one yet. But even if he found out, that wouldn't change a thing between them, Yonko or not, he would always consider Linlin to just be his mother. Looking up towards the night skies, he wondered about his hometown, the mountain bandits, Makino and Major would slap, about the friends of his Nakama and people he met along the way. How would they react to the crazy shit he just pulled off in Marineford? Around the world, in various times. In Fuchsia Village's party's bar 5 days after the war. A toast to those crazy boys of ours. Yeah. East Blue's pride and joy. Ace with 850 million and Luffy with a record-breaking billion. People were cheering and celebrating over the news of what Luffy did inside the bar while Makino just giggled while looking over the newspaper behind her counter. She was glad Luffy saved Ace and got of that place together. It was a pretty huge shock to them when they learned about Ace's and Luffy's fathers. But they still were the same to them either way, notorious parents or not. They still were Luffy and Ace. There were those who did cursed them for their lineage and existence, but honestly, they can just fuck off for that. Major would slap, who was sitting on a stool beside Makino, just sighed heavily with a mug of beer in hand. He really needed a drink after hearing what happened to Marineford and what that brat Luffy did. And as much as he wanted to shut them up, he knew it would be pointless. He was glad those boys made it out of the messy ordeal alive and well, although it still didn't change that they were now even more notorious criminals, though. We shouldn't be celebrating about this. Those brats have gone off and became even more of a menace. Cheers to that. Major would slap couldn't even find the strength to retort towards them after prior attempts and resorted to just sighing instead. Even if I'm the damn Major, people won't listen to me. The Major slumped down dejected while Makino giggled behind him while looking at the bounties of Luffy and Ace. Luffy and Ace sure are trouble magnets, aren't they? Tilda, at least they still are definitely alive. Makino beamed. After the war, Luffy and Ace had never been sighted apart from Luffy showing up at Marineford and ringing the ox bell a few days later, probably to avoid Marines that would definitely hunt them down and not let up and trail behind them if they were sighted earlier. She and everyone in Fushun knew they were alive and well, and probably eating a whole lot too. Everyone was celebrating and being noisy, much to Woodslap's annoyance, until the door opened with Deiden and her mountain bandits behind her with a serious expression. Everyone went quiet and tensed at the mountain bandit who walked up to the counter and sat beside the Major, who was internally panicking but kept his composure. "What do you want, you damn mountain bandit?" Deiden snorted and looked amused. She could see the fear and worry in the Major's eyes. "Isn't it obvious?" The woman took out a bag of berries and dropped it in front of Makino, who upon seeing the bandit's expression just smiled and went to fill another mug. Deiden turned around towards the entire patrons of the bar waiting. When Makino finally gave her a mug, she grabbed it and raised it in front of them. "I'm here to celebrate my boy's achievement. Why didn't one of you came and told me?" At that, they relaxed, and their smiles and grins returned and raised their mugs back to her. Maybe the mountain bandits weren't so bad after all. "Sorry, we were too busy drinking ourselves in joy over this. Ain't that right, lads? Invite me next time. Why won't you selfish bastards? We shouldn't be celebrating about their crimes, damn it. In Shell's Town's bar, 3 days after the war. Will Kobe be okay?" Rika asked, worried, while sitting beside base commander of the 153rd Branch, Ripper, along with his fellow man. Ririka came over and gave Ripper a glass of wine, the other man accompanying him a mug of beer each, and her little daughter Rika a strawberry sundae. Ripper just pat Rika's head and rubbed it reassuringly. "Don't worry, lass, that lad of ours got guts, and was personally trained by Vice Admiral Garp. Ain't no way he ain't gonna keel over and die from a scare like that." The Marines gathered in the bar had several bandages wrapped around parts of their body that had been injured during the war, but they were fortunately the ones who received the lesser injuries. It was a fucking shit show, especially when they saw the same kid who took down Morgan, falling down from the skies above with several prisoners and proceeded to beat the ever-loving shit of the Marines. But even if Luffy has become a threat that could no longer be ignored by the government, he still would be the same boy that freed them from their previous hellish base commander. But still, that other friend of his has definitely been either holding back or had a major power boost. 2. Beat the 3 admirals like that, and that poor admiral, even if he was a piece of work. Ripper shuddered. He was one of the unfortunate Marines that witnessed the devastating hit that unfortunately graced Admiral Sakazuki's nuts. But after seeing Kobe try and single-handedly stop the bloodshed, even though their objective was lost, he felt way less bad for him, and also his respect towards the boy being raised considerably. He knew he was a Marine and he shouldn't be thinking this, but thank God for the red-haired Yonko Shanks stepping in and saving Kobe from a fatal blow coming from that red dog. Right now, Kobe was in a coma, and they had no idea if he had woken up or not. After the war, all base commander that weren't in a severe state with the Marines that are under them were to be immediately sent back to their base and manage the islands they are tasked with protecting. They had left several islands open just for the Yonko fight. Right now, the boy was in the infirmary, just like the many injured Marines. Noticing the mother and daughter duo's confused expression, he just huffed before taking the new bounty poster and displaying it to Rika and his mother. Rika looked at all while her mother looked stunned when they saw their savior's new bounty. His bounty is taking rather a considerable time to circulate around in this sea, but everyone will eventually know about it. Ripper sighed, higher-ups are losing their crap and going nuts over trying to calm down the press over the failure, especially what the boy did. But even so, we won't forget what he did for us, but make sure word doesn't spread about his actions. Could draw unwanted attention, yeah, Ripper said, smiling softly while winking at Rika too, which she smiled. My lips are sealed. Rika continued smiling before Ririka remembered something. Oh yeah, Ripper-san. What is it? My daughter is interested in being a waitress in your base. Do you mind taking her in as a trainee of sorts? In Baltigo, base of the Revolutionaries, Sabo had come back and greeted everyone before making his way towards Dragon's office. Everyone who looked at his face as he walked couldn't help but wonder what had their chief. Smiling from ear to ear, absolutely beaming with positivity with a certain bounce in his steps. He was so drunk of joy, he didn't even bother to knock nor open the door like normal. Instead he just kicked the door with a stupid grin on his face. Dragon turned to Sabo a bit amused at his actions but didn't show it. I take it your little reunion went smoothly. At that Sabo nodded rapidly, yeah. Dragon huffed before going back to his serious attitude. Anyways, you came at the perfect time. We had just received words about 2 crewmates of Straw Hat being sighted that snapped Sabo out of it, and he looked interested. Really? Who are they and where? Demon Child Nico Robin and possibly Black Leg Sanji. Ivankov from Momoro Island had contacted us around a few hours before you left and we conversed a bit before he informed me of someone claiming to be Black Leg Sanji on his island, but his bounty poster doesn't match his facial appearance at all. Sabo didn't react much to Ivankov's return. He knew Ivankov-san would be okay. Ivankov slightly suspects the man to be a government spy, but besides that, not much is known about the man for now. Sabo slightly tense but relaxed knowing Ivankov-san could probably take care of the man if he did turn out to be a government agent. As for Nico Robin, Kumar unfortunately sent her towards the bridge country known as Tequila Wolf. At that Sabo seemed stunned, isn't that? Dragon nodded in confirmation, one of the places we liberated a few days ago, but unfortunately, she was sent there prior before we showed up. It took some time before the news finally reached towards us, which was just a few minutes ago. Dragon continued on, we should be expecting for her arrival in another 2 or 3 days or so while Ivankov is busy investigating further about the man's identity. Also, did you manage to get away to contact my son? Sabo nodded and grinned, yeah. Before we departed, I exchanged numbers with Rayleigh-san, who is training Luffy right now. He raised an eyebrow at the mention of the Dark King Rayleigh, as in Roger's first mate. Sabo nodded, yeah. That guy. Sabo went on to explain that Luffy was training with Rayleigh for 2 years while his crewmates were presumably doing the same thing. His son was strong enough himself and could take on any opposing forces form the New World. But his crew on the other hand he couldn't tell. He only knew their bounties and what they did on paper, but that was it. He can't gauge their strength without personally seeing it in action or in footage. With that in mind he assumed that they were probably around the levels of a low-ranking Rear Admiral. Theoretically, they have potential to become stronger if they unlocked or train their haki, work on their personal flaws or improve and upgrade on something they have good efficiency in, which now made him frown slightly when he thought about training. What kind of insane bats hit insane training did his crazy old man put Luffy through to make him so damn powerful? He knew his son was going to be strong, but he didn't expect for him to be close to Yonko levels of strong. He shrugged off that thought for another day. He was inwardly shivering remembering his own training from his old man. Sabo, if possible, contact Rayleigh and get Luffy on hold from him when either Ivankov confirms that it is Black Leg on his island or when Nico Robin arrives. Got it. At the location of the Whitebeard pirates. Hey! Oi! What the hell are you guys talking about? Ace right now was flabbergasted and shocked of what his brothers and one sister said towards him with either smiles or grins on their faces. Marco, the first mate, walked forward with a lazy smirk. Isn't it obvious, yo? Or should we say it again? The Phoenix took Ace's silence as a yes. Turning around towards his siblings with a grin, he shouted. All in favor of Ace being the next captain say a. Hey! All white-beard pirates, without hesitation, shouted in agreement over this decision. But why? Shouldn't it be you, Marco? You are the first mate, you know. The pineapple just snorted, as if it was always going to be you, Ace. You are the favorite. Brother Yo, and besides, Oyaji and us talked about it. Before the war took place, we knew Pops may not make it out alive with his condition, and even if did, he wouldn't have much time left over that, Yo. Marco said solemnly. Everyone had held their breath and tensed up when they had that talk before going into battle to save their favorite brother. Some even had tears threatening to spill out of their eyes when professional nurses on board the ship gave their professional opinion, even if it also hurted them to say it out loud. But they knew it in their hearts it was bound to happen. His cancer was progressively getting worse, his old age just making it faster and worse for his health. He suffered from several strokes throughout his life. It was honestly amazing and a testament to his strength that he could still wreck Marineford that badly with not only his poor health, but also with how many injuries he had sustained throughout that war. But I got missile dash. Captured. Yeah, we still haven't scolded your ass for that now, have we? Did you have any idea how much we worried you? Marco said with tick mark on his head. None of them had drilled their disappointment into his thick-headed skull. Yet. And before you start spouting about how you are too weak, remember that most of us witnessed how you could somewhat go toe-to-toe against Popsio. Weakened or not, that still is something. Not a lot of people can do. Why I know. Ace was about to talk about how he was Roger's son, but again before he could open his mouth, Marco cut him again almost as if he was reading his mind. And also, before you start talking about how you are Roger's son and how that makes you unfit to take after Pops, are you Roger's son or Whitebeard's son? Okay, now Ace stepped in at this slightly pissed. Oi, I'm always his son. Not that bastard of a pirate king. Marco lazily smirked at that. All right. As his son, you should obviously take over his place with how you are not only the favorite child, but also the favorite sibling. End of discussion, yo. Oi, holdo dash. Ace is hereby the captain. Let's celebrate. Yeah. I haven't AG dash. Bring out the booze and food. Just dash. Make sure to get the crocodile meat. La dash. Congratulations. Ace. Let me have a say over this, damn it. Over wherever Shanks is at, a few hours after leaving Whitebeard's funeral. Anchor sure has grown strong, eh? Shanks said, sitting down with one hand on a bottle of bourbon while the other had his new bounty. It was safe to say they were surprised at first before proceeding to throw a celebratory party over their Anchor's achievement. Ben just snorted and smiled slightly after taking a huge sip of whiskey. Of course he would. Don't you remember that he used conquerors and armament when he was just fucking 6? Especially when we trained him and helped him understand what he could do. Shanks just huffed and smiled in nostalgia at that. He didn't expect to be shocked by anything in the Eastern Seas, but Luffy proved him dead wrong with how he dealt with those mountain bandits, especially that one who flaunted his bounty and tried to kidnap him. Poor bastard must have broken a few bones when Luffy turned the tables on him and started punching and kicking him while using armament before landing a huge blow and sending him off into the ocean, where he was later eaten by the local sea king. But that's what he gets for trying to kidnap Luffy. And also, with the fact that his father is the most wanted criminal in the world. Yasop added, before chugging a bottle. All of them snorted before Lucky Roo grinned. I bet you that Luffy's mother turns out to have a ridiculous background or reputation. All crewmen on deck grinned while coming up with bets on that. 1,500,000. It's a celestial dragon. That family tree line of anchors is beyond fucked that it might just be possible. 5 million on the mother turning out to be a woman that turned into a man to disguise the identity of who Luffy's mom is. Asterisk snort asterisk. As if. Bet you Anchor's mother turns out to be a high-ranking marine and it's an extremely private affair. 7,500,000 on that being the case. I'm gonna one-up you on that and put 8 million that it's a Cypher Paul agent. You all are thinking too small. Everyone winced before looking at one of their crewmates who looked beyond wasted with bottles of alcohol surrounding him. 10 million. It's one of Big Mom's child with how Anchor's appetite is as big as a sea king. Everyone looked in disbelief at that ridiculous bet and how much he was willing to put such a hefty sum of money for it before Shanks grinned at that. Oh yeah. I bet the mother of Anchor is Big Mom herself. Everyone looked even more flabbergasted towards their captain's extremely bold bet. Even the Drunken One instantly sobered up. That's how ridiculous it was. This was getting beyond stupid, and generally out of hand at this point. And how much are you betting on it being the case, Captain? Ben raised an eyebrow towards his captain, removing his cigar in exchange for having a bottle of whiskey in his mouth instead. 156 million. He immediately did a huge spit take at that. Everyone looked at their captain before looking at each other, and proceeded to just drink, laugh and joke around at that. As if Big Mom could be Luffy's mother. Right. In the wreckage of Marineford, 2 weeks after the war. Right now, every person who could move were packing stuff and placing them on boats to be shipped off towards G1. The Marine headquarters was planned to be moved from Marineford to G1 after several discussions on what to do moving onwards after the war. Although, for several men, that was postponed as they can't help but sweat while staring towards two admirals facing each other off. Even if Fleet Admiral Sengo supports you in taking his steed, you're lazy and incompetent. Behavior is inappropriate for such a high-ranking position and carrying out justice. The center of attention was Admiral Sakazuki and Admiral Kuzan facing off, on the Red Dog's side. It was boiling hot while the blue pheasant emitted a cold chill around his surroundings. Aokiji has not responded or retorted in any way, as Akainu kept stating how he shouldn't be the Fleet Admiral and sometimes threw insults in his sentences that was directed at him. But he kept his chill. After all, he had a very strong counter-argument, courtesy to a certain pirate. Aokiji kept silent until he raised his head up and smirked. Sakazuki-san, you? Being the Fleet Admiral. Let's not joke around. With the biggest grin Kuzan could muster, he finally retorted with one sentence. With one sentence out of his mouth, it caused everyone who heard him to drop their jaws and single-handedly made him the most respected man on the spot for what he just said. Navy history was in the making with the insult from Aokiji directed towards Akainu. From this single sentence alone. You ain't got the balls to lead the Navy. Admiral Kuzan, the legend that the Navy didn't need, but deserved. A fight ensued later on in Punk Hazard that was recorded as the most legendary and most destructive battle between two admirals that went down. And even if Aokiji lost or won when he fought Akainu on that day, it didn't matter to him. He would be the one smirking in the end when he remembered this moment forever for the rest of his life. Back towards Luffy and his family. It was a long and boring ride with Brulee and some of her siblings pleading for her mother slightly. For Zeus to move at max speed while Broy along with some to put their foot down and heavily convince their mother that it was not a good idea, for their sake, to go faster. Big Mom just shrugged before she took a coin out of seemingly nowhere and flipped it. Heads will be max speed and tails will be normal speed. Katakuri looked towards his siblings that sided with Broy in pity, for fortune was not on their side, as it landed on heads. When Mama flipped the coin and it landed on heads, Broy paled while Brulee grinned. Zeus. Max speed. Yes, Mama. Oh, come on. HHH. As if history was repeating itself, Broy found herself clinging to Brulee while the older sibling just grinned and laughed. Unfortunately for some and fortunately for others, it was rather short-lived. HHHO. The island's over there. Broy said when an island finally came into view. At that, Zeus slowed down before eventually stopping upon Mama's orders when they had a good distance between them, much to the disappointment of Brulee, Luffy and several others. While Broy and the rest let out a huge sigh of relief. Marble stepped up and took out binoculars and inspected the island. Looking at the island, she noticed how the layout was similar to that of a normal marine base with several forts fitted with cannons surrounding the island. What does it look like? Mayukuru asked, walking and crouching beside her. They are built similarly to a marine base, loads of twin-barreled turrets and some triple-barreled turrets surrounding the place. Their base is probably at the center with how much that one building stands out. With her long arms, she pointed towards the giant building that looked like a medieval castle. What about their port? Big Mom asked. Marble turned her head towards the left, looking at the harbor. Their port's got 3 ships docked, a modified civilian galleon with extra cannons mounted and having some steel on their hull, while the other 2 seems like regular civilian frigates. The harbor's got barrels, crates, and cages. She asked to particularly no one. She was wondering what the hell were in them. There was huge rags covering them so she couldn't tell. Cages. Anything in them. Can't tell, they're covered. She passed her binoculars towards Mayukuru who was beside her. After passing it around so everyone could get a good look, Big Mom ordered Zeus to move again. All right, Zeus. Hover over them above the clouds. Yes, Mama. After ascending towards the skies, the children looked in awe, admiring the night skies above the clouds while Big Mom walked forward and looked down. That's at least a 25,000 or 30,000 foot drop from Zeus to down there. She took off her hat and turned towards her children. Napoleon. Expand. Got it, Mama. The hat homie slowly expanded towards the size of a caravel. All right, listen, you all get into Napoleon, and I jump off. Once we land, leave Napoleon and start slaughtering everyone. Got it. She spoke her plan out. Yes, Mama, wait, what? Most of the Charlottes agreed while the rest weren't really keen on that idea. Some were thrilled by the prospects of falling off from Zeus while others couldn't stomach that. Hey, don't worry about it. It's just a few seconds of falling. She lowered Napoleon down until all 86 of her children were on board before picking the homie up and looking down. Some were reluctant to get in Napoleon while others just threw themselves in and were hyped about it. Taking one step back, she jumped. Operation Night Witches, commence. Chapter 20. At the harbor, two men were walking over to the harbor to have a smoke break. What's wrong, Pensador? The man asked, side glancing at his friend rubbing his chin in deep thought. Don't you think Butcher-san and his group are running a bit late? They should have shown up right about now. He's probably having too much fun with dismembering and chopping those people up along with the rest. Tilda, we should have went with them, the men said reassuringly with a hint of jealousy. He wanted to skewer and bath in the blood of the Toto land citizens and Charlottes along with them. I don't know, man. Sure, we are strong, but we still are targeting a Yonko's territory after all. Pensador said, sweating a bit. He was more confident if it was a warlord's territory that they were targeting, but they weren't hunting for them, they were hunting something bigger. And they may have bitten off more that they can chew for all they have known. He wasn't the only one, prior towards the operation, when they raided and made this island. They were initially going to target a warlord's territory in the New World, but their boss wanted to hunt a bigger fish, a Yonko's territory instead. Some of his mans protest, to which he either waved off their worries or just straight up executed them on the spot himself for insubordination. They zipped their mouths and agreed to this very reluctantly. They wanted to disagree, but they didn't want to join their friends who did vocally display how they disagreed, which demoted them from a member to funds and profits. The plan was to deceive idiots into a suicide mission under the guise that it was a capture mission when they were actually just pebbles being tossed towards a bear. They kept tossing, group upon group, until it was deemed that the Yonko's forces should be weakened enough for a attack. But the smarter ones that weren't high of their power, win streak, ego, and increasing notoriety, knew this wasn't going to work. Pebbles weren't going to do shit. The only thing they were doing was just poking a hornet's nest. A big fucking hornet's nest. Whatever. Anyways, got a lighter? Mine seems to be out. The man sighed, looking somewhat irritated with a cig in his mouth as he kept flicking his lighter without a spark being set off. Yeah, sure. Give me a minute. His buddy dug into his pocket and found his lighter. He brought it into his own cig in his mouth and flicked the thing a few times before finally a spark ignited and it lit up his cig. All right, here's a dash. Asterisk thud asterisk. The other man had his jaws hanging open, letting the unlit cigarette fall out of his mouth as he stared wide-eyed towards the night sky. Oi, what's wrong? Is that the sun? Before he could fully register what his friend said. Prometheus. Incinerate. Candy shower. Mochi Hayden. Juicy sparkle. AON, juicy sparkle. Charlotte Smoothie shoots several exploding droplets of juice-o water from her sword, based from pirate warriors. Their defenses mounted around the island were destroyed before they could even aim or know whoever was attacking them. The sirens sounded and a panicked voice could be heard over the speakers. Attention! The big MOM pirates are descending down from the skies above US. The man looked surprised before looking up and paling considerable when he saw pretty much their grim reaper coming down on them. They poked a sleeping behemoth, and it woke up pissed. He uttered one word that summarized their situation, right before he himself died along with his buddy when they turned into a sponge from the raining arrows made out of candy that skewered them. Shit. Charlotte's POV. Brace. Asterisk thud asterisk. Big Mom made sure to jump and land onto one of the boats docked in harbor, breaking the boat in half with her landing. Before her heels were touching the seawater as the ship was sinking. She leaped onto the port, and her children immediately left the hat while drawing their weapons. When they saw the oncoming forces, "Mema, your oar dash!" Perospero was cut off as Luffy zoomed past him, sprinting towards a group of enemies with his finger in his mouth. Gear third. He jumped and blew onto his mouth, while his siblings watch on his reckless charge. Gomu Gomu no. Gigant pistol. He decimated the forces like bowling pins. Big Mom looked on amused before issuing her order while pointing at her reckless son. Follow your brother's example and just destroy them without hesitation. Pick a group to play with. Tilda. That's my order. Yes, Mama. They followed after their brother. Many observed the many organ harvesters that were flooding down from the stairs. Some just jumped down or fell off from the harbor down to the port. Luffy landed and deflated his arm back to normal while giving a challenging grin at the enemies, who had several faces of shock, fear, and surprised. Oi, what the hell is someone like him doing here? Did Mugiwara allied with Big Mom? A man stepped up with a feral grin. So, what if Straw Hat allies with Big Mom or not? The Charlottes are all here in one place, aren't they? Their organs are gonna sell high when we rip it out of them. Kill them. Yeah. Their morale shot up instantly and they charged recklessly towards the family. The Charlottes just split off to deal with the several small forces that were approaching them. They sure are confident in themselves. Oven scoffed at their ignorance before calmly walking towards a group, looking at the man clad in what seemed like custom-made medieval armor, which made him stand out as the idiots under him raised their weapons and charged at him. He snorted before launching a boiling warm right hook when they got close enough. Heat Danashi. He threw a punch infused with his devil fruit, decimating the reckless enemies and melting their weapons, and for the unlucky ones, their skin in the process. He kept walking forward while staring at the knight, who even under his armor, he could tell was sweating slightly, which had Oven grinning sinisterly. What's wrong? Can't handle the heat. He taunted him. HMMPH, don't be so full of yourself. You are our prey. Soru. The knight flashed behind the high-heat human, plunging his sword into the man's back to skewer the man's heart, but was shocked when his blade melted into molten steel upon touching his skin. He stared at his broken blade, which was glowing red, before he dropped it while backing up away from the man, the monster in front of him. Oven slowly turned with yellow glowing eye trails and gave a smile that was mocking and taunting in nature at the shocked man that thought he could actually wound him without haki. Ho, you scared? Why not I give you a nice warm hug? Tilda Oven said mockingly with a wide smirk while spreading his arms wide open while he took a stance to charge at him. Monster. The armored man started to sweat even more as the monster wearing human skin in front of him just kept glowing and getting brighter in front of him. In fact, it felt like he was slowly getting cooked alive under his armor. Oven, without warning, launched himself towards the knight, who squealed and tried to move out of the way, but unfortunately, he collided with Oven, who wrapped his arms around him and put him in a tight bear hug. Do you know? Tightly covering food in aluminum tin foil and shoving it into the oven to cook it creates more steam in the process. Tilda. The man's eye widened before he slowly faced the monster, hugging him with horror etched all over his place, his instinct telling him to do anything it takes to get away from him, while the monster hugging him kept the grin on his face. Humans smell like burnt pork roast when cooked for a certain amount of time with the right temperature. Tilda Oven's grin kept getting wider and wider while his eyes held glee in them when the men went from frozen solid to squirming a lot, and he could hear him whimpering and sobbing for his life, his flailing not helping his case at all. He wanted to make him panic even more by slightly raising the temperature a bit, which got what he wanted, the man squirming and screaming for absolute mercy now while trying to wiggle his way out of his grip. LL, let me go. Someone. Save me. Oven snorted before he slowly but surely raised the temperature higher and higher at a slow but steady pace, which made the man panic more. The armor his prey was wearing has turned into a human-shaped brazen bull, his very own sarcophagus that accommodated to his build. Steam slowly started to come out of his visor while his armor was starting to glow red from the heat. No, no, no. Let me go. Let me go. Someone. Anyone. Get me out of here. He kept screaming and wailing, squirming and shaking his entire body. Desperately to get out of Oven's grasp, to no avail, he responded to his struggles by tightening the hug and but kept the increase of heat at the same pace, making sure not to melt the armor. and only heating it. He wanted to make this a long and painful experience for him. He wanted to make these bastards pay dearly for annoying him and having the audacity to attempt and bring harm towards his siblings. Although it might be short-lived when he saw how enemy reinforcement was approaching his position. The reinforcements approaching were shocked and alarmed when they saw one of their top officers getting roasted in a bear hug by one of the Big Mom's children. Oi, let go of Briggs-san. Kill that man. Yeah. TSK. Guess our hugging session is over. A shame, honestly. The man just responded by letting out whimpers in response. He broke his vocal cords with all the screaming. Steam was emitting from his visor a bit, but was able to fully obscure his face, which probably was for the best. He was no longer wiggling, possibly from relief that Oven would end his suffering and just kill him already. But just as Oven was about to let go to deal with the reinforcements, "Don't worry, I will handle them," Daifuki said stoically while walking past his brother, scoffing at the knight wrapped around his brother's arm when he took a quick glance while he walked forward towards the enemy while waving off at his brother. "Continue baking him and feed him to the fishes in the ocean when you're done." Oven just smiled at his brother, especially with his brother's suggestion on what to do when he was done, before slowly grinning towards the burnt man, who whimpered even more. Even with his vocal cords broken and possibly fried, he still was able to painfully let out a few words. Let G go. Just ust. K-kill me already. Oven snorted before acting like he was deep in thought about whether to prolong or end his suffering for a few seconds before he disturbingly, cheerfully beamed at him. Nope. And just like that, he raised the heat again, much to the man's burning despair. Daifuki didn't look impressed by the small group charging towards him. He surveyed his surroundings before grinning at the group in front of him. His siblings weren't near him, which meant he could freely command his genie to his bidding. Mema and his siblings were not happy when he sometimes hit his own allies or almost grazed his siblings whenever his genie swung. He shuddered a bit when reminiscing, remembering his younger sister Smoothie chopping the shit out of his head for nearly putting a scar on one of his sisters when he flew into a blind rage. When he was dealing with a bastard that kept dodging, he even subconsciously reached to rub his head as if he still could feel the pain. He rubbed the center of his belt, which had a depiction of a genie lamp which was glowing. "Let's go, genie." Blue smoke shot forward from his belt and it formed into a giant blue Basenta-wielding Majin. The organ harvesters approaching Daifuki now paled and came to a full stop. "What can I do for you, master?" "Those insects charging at me. Off with their heads." The genie hemphed when receiving his orders and flew towards the group, who now slowly started to take a few steps back. When the genie got in range, he let out a war cry and spun his Basento above his head, which had the enemies finally sprinting away. Unfortunately, they still were in range. Genuine rage split. He swinged horizontally and expertly aimed for all of their necks, separating their heads for each and single of them, even those who were the farthest from his blade. Daifuki stopped rubbing his belt, which made the genie just poof out of existence before looking back at Oven and whistled at the sight. The night Oven was cooking had his armor showing signs of melting with how molten steel was dripping of him. The visor emitting white steam was now emitting black smoke. He finally stopped hugging him and just lifted him up so he could come face to face. Well, what's left off his face? He had to give it to the men, they cooked for such a long time but still hanging in there, even if it was by a thread of his life. It was quite an impressive feat to live for that long while cooked alive for roughly 5 minutes under such high temperature. Welp, let's hope the fishes and especially the sea kings find you still edible. Tilda, with one hand holding onto his torso, with all his might, he tossed him far into the ocean like garbage. "All right, we should probably sweep the harbor clean and move up to port," Oven said, observing the port while Daifuki grunted in agreement. Towards their left, their younger sister, Amande, walked slowly towards her own group that she would deal with. She hadn't unsheathed her blade yet, in exchange for holding a cig and lighter in her hand to smoke, all the while calmly walking towards the organ harvesters. She couldn't smoke throughout the journey, so her non-smoking siblings wouldn't have to smell the nicotine from her demon lady. A person amongst them murmured in fear before gulping while shakily gripping his blade. Putting the cig in her mouth and lighting it, she was satisfied she could finally smoke, although it didn't show on her face. She put away her lighter and had a hand on her sword's hilt and unsheathed her weapon slowly. She finally bothered to raise her head to see them with her eyes when she could see their feet under her hat before taking a deep inhale and exhale from her cigarette. Not worth putting much effort in killing or drawing out a fight from them, really. The organ harvesters were tense as the tall woman in front of them kept walking calmly towards them. She muttered something under her breath before vanishing. Heh! One member of the group exclaimed before there was suddenly a large shadow looming over them, and they now could smell the faint scent of cigarette smoke. Wait. Shit. She got Bahi. Slow waltz. The last thing they saw was their headless bodies with Amande looming over behind them with a bloody blade as their heads hit the floor before they blacked out. Amande sheathed her blade before looking over her sisters, particularly paying more attention to Effiler. They were about down with dealing with their group. She looked around and saw her other siblings sweeping through the harbor and narrowed her eyes at the forces they are either dealing with or dealt with. The information Snack received about how many people they should be expecting was either a lie, or they hired a lot more man, which made the information outdated, with the latter being the most likely. Hard for anyone to lie when they were interrogated by them of all people. No matter, though, just extra garbage to get rid of. She wasn't the only one who noticed the unnaturally high amount of enemy forces too. They have a little more than 300 Peroin tilde, the eldest son said out loud to himself as he passed by people whom he suffocated in candy. Looking at the enemy reinforcements that were sent towards the harbor, they were dealing with more than 300, and they hadn't even moved up to their base yet. Although it made sense, the island's facilities and the place itself was pretty huge, which meant they would require a lot of men to maintain and operate the entire place. Either that or their little friends in Mondior's prison may have been way more mentally fragile than they thought, and they spewed out jumbled and messy information in a haste to stop their suffering that was dish out from Snack and Cracker to get them to spill about the organization, judging by how they were recklessly charging towards his siblings without a second thought, as if they were confident in taking one of them down, and the fact that he has only seen one so far. Using Soru, he has nothing much to worry about. The eldest son, Perospero, hearing his own name being said, he turned towards the source of the voice, with his interest being piqued a little at the men who spoke his name. Ho! And who are you supposed to be, Peroin? Your executioner. Cuckoo. Tilde you? My executioner. Are you sure it's not the other way around? Tilde Perospero said, putting more weight on the last part with a challenging look, daring him to make the first move and try to even put a scratch on him. The man scowled before quickly going back to a poker face while looking like he was heavily concentrating, which made Perospero narrow his eye and put his guard up a bit at the man's facial expression. The man dashed forward and threw several throwing knives at fast speed, but Perospero quickly prevented them from hitting him. Ame mini umiushi. He spurted candy from his left hand, not only stopping the blades from hitting him, but the candy was also making its way towards the knife thrower, who quickly leaped over it before he could be engulfed by candy, and was now wielding a tomahawk aimed at the eldest son of Big Mom, who in response just simply blocked with his staff. The man leaped behind Perospero and tried to kick him with haki infused in his leg. Perospero was now even more interested. It has been a while since he fought a haki user, and he was the first one in a long while besides his siblings in a spa that had him use armament haki, especially to defend himself. But not only that. Who are you? You clearly stand out more and dress differently amongst the savages that dared provoked us, Peroin. Perospero asked with a diplomatic tone with a tinge of playfulness in it. Me? Well, considering you are going to be a dead man when I'm done with you, I guess I should indulge you. I'm the leader of Silence Embrace, a mercenary group of 890 men for hire. Ah, now it makes sense, Peroin, tilde, guessing he paid really high for your services here. Especially for you to target me, here. Perospero said with a joyful tone that didn't hide the venom dripping in it. If he was the leader, his siblings wouldn't have problem with the rest of the lower members. Then, although he should watch out for more hired groups. Indeed, he would fully pay me your bounty of 700 million, unlike the Marines, who would give 30% of what you're worth if I present your corpse to them. Quite the deal, eh? Indeed, Peroin, tilde, a hefty sum of money. Why not I strike a better deal for you? Perospero said, getting quite amused when he could see the greed in the man's soul flaring up, a man driven by money, someone that shouldn't be trusted. So blinded by greed that he wasn't even paying attention to his surroundings. Ho! A deal with the Charlotte family would be quite beneficial and may prove more valuable than the present deal for your death. What do you propose? Yours. Perospero said, mixed with a hint of venom in a gleeful tone. So be it. Your head shall w. What is this? The man tried to move into a pose, probably to strike him, but couldn't move his legs. Looking down, he was surprised when he saw a puddle of candy underneath his feet that was slowly making its way up on his shins. Do you think you truly dodged my initial attack, Praline? Tilda, I was busy buying time by talking with you as my small sea slug of candy was slowly crawling towards underneath your nose. Cuckoo, Tilda. Curse you to hell. The man said, struggling to move as the candy moved up to his upper torso. Now, not the first nor the last who will condemn me to hell, Praline. Tilda now, Candy Man. The candy instantly made its way onto the man's face, suffocating him to death as the candy forcefully entered his mouth, ears, nostrils, and eyes. Cuckoo, Tilda now, I wonder if there were more groups hired. Perospero muttered to himself. It seemed plausible. Organs do sell quite high in the black market, which meant more men could be hired. The harbor was slowly turning from a battlefield to just hills of bodies littered everywhere. Finally, after some time though, the numbers dwindled into none. We have dealt with more than 2,000 of them from my count, Katakuri said, sitting down with his legs crossed on piles of bodies while stabbing his spear onto one of them and let it stay there. Many had a hole between their eyes while others showed several holes punctured through their bodies. He turned his head and was looking at Snack and Cracker. Maybe we went a little too hard on our little hostages, Snack said, sheepishly rubbing his head. They might have used very strong means to get the information out of their prisoners, so strong in fact that it might have broken their mental state, because clearly this was a little more than 300, and that excluded the people who proudly declared themselves as being part of another group or being the leader of said group. They weren't so confident when he dealt with them with ease though. He deserved it, Cracker said shruggingly while waving off at Snack. They should have known the outcome of dealing with them. It would take a miracle to even harm one of his fellow sweet commanders, including himself. Hell, even Inanna was able to incapacitate one before he showed up and finish off the man, and like the big brother that he was, lightly scolded her to go back to Mama for her safety. Although he made sure to praise her for stabbing that man in the Achilles heel, 6 years old and already assisting in murder. He couldn't help but rub her head for that as she walked with a jump in her step towards Mama, with a smile waving a knife, probably to tell her about her small achievement. Did some of them proclaim themselves being hired men by any chance, Praline? Perospero asked. In response, several siblings shot their arms up. Welp, that confirmed his suspicions then. Pretty sure I heard someone said something about being the leader of Black Hearts or whatever. Cracker said shruggingly. For me, it was a captain of the Dread Pirates. Here is the guy. Panna said cheerfully, hoisting the dead captain's limp body up with her claw still pierced through his chest, blood freshly still dripping. She then threw the body aside after everyone had a good look. Dealt with some former Marines, but they must have been low-ranking ones, Smoothie said, pointing at the pile of dead bodies with the corpses all having the standard-issue Marine coat hanging from their shoulders. Not only do we have to deal with their main forces, but we have to deal with hired mercenaries. Perospero said, which everyone nodded at, but that didn't matter, they will just crush them, like everyone else. Although, why have the forces stopped coming? It went from a noisy battlefield to just dead silence now. Morndior asked to know one. He was a bit paranoid and was thinking about the reasoning at the sudden halt. They probably are huddled up in the main bases and other facilities. Galette offered the most reasonable explanation towards her sibling. It doesn't matter, they are clearly weak. Let's just crush the rest of them, Smoothie said, raising her sword to the sky. Her siblings followed. Yeah. Also, where's Luffy? Perospero asked, looking around before. Gomu Gigante pistol. The port shook along with several screams piercing the night, and they looked at the harbor with smoke rising from the distance. The Charlottes just stared at the smoke. Some twitched their eyebrows before sighing and just running towards the harbor. Their brother Shaw was reckless. AON. Brew. Couldn't upload, save or shit on fanfic for a while till now. Still busy with personal stuff, but I think I can manage somewhat. On brighter news, the TeleHEAD is nearing 4.5k subscribers, so that's neat. Working on all 85 of the Charlotte's bias and etc., so there is that too. Also, the Wattpad ver, so far for now, will have a couple of chapters rewritten. Chapter 1 now has a bit of a flashback between the moments of Big Mom and Dragon. Next chapter will probably be a short side story, so I could put the bias in tongue-poking smiley. I will also be making another story later down the line, essentially all one-shots of how Ace could have been saved from Marineford or impelled down while I rake my brain on ideas on how to progress this story. Anyways, here's a canon make, tongue sticking out. Akainu's miserable adventure as Fleet Admiral. Akainu sat down in the Fleet Admiral chair in his new office after his promotion, his body heavily wrapped in bandages underneath his clothes from his fight with Aokiji. It was definitely going to leave a scar. He was staring down at the table in frustration, reminiscing about the fight. That bastard. Damn. Aokiji muttered, cursing as he laid down on his stomach before he turned over and looked towards his lower torso and grimaced. His foot was definitely a lost cause. The burns were too severe. He looked up, away from the leg, and focused on a less but still severely injured Akainu, panting heavily but still standing up straight without slouching as he stared him down. Blood covered his entire body like him. Give up, Aokiji. I will never accept you as Sengo's replacement, Akainu said, wheezing a bit. Before he breathed heavily while panting, he didn't know how long it had been, but the fight must have gone on for days straight. Neither side were willing to lose this important battle of their lives, a battle that will be the ultimate decision of what the Navy shall become. Either way, it will be a turning point in marine history. The loyal red dog against the blue pheasant, both suffered severe wounds, but in this moment, Akainu had the upper hand with amputating his fellow admiral, all to achieve his goal no matter what. He respected his strength, but somewhat as laid back and lazy as him couldn't be an admiral. He refused to accept it. He would ruin the Navy if someone as incompetent as him was to be put in charge. He took a side glance towards the other admiral, who was spectating from the sidelines, sitting on a lawn chair with a bucket of popcorn on a table next to him while holding a megaphone which was lying on his lap while staring at them, laid back as always while keeping his views on justice unclear to anyone. Kizaru took a handful of popcorn and ate them, not breaking eye contact with Akainu when he see him side-glancing, and instead shot him a smirk which had him getting his attention back to Aokiji. Aokiji defiantly just smirked at him before he made an icicle and stabbed it into his burnt leg and cut it off. He grunted in pain before he placed his hand on the stump and froze it and made a peg leg of sorts with ice. And let someone like you take over, Aokiji said, standing up, getting used to the ice peg leg, while glaring at Akainu before grinning again, which had Akainu practically internally groaning. You don't have the balls. And now Akainu was groaning externally in irritation. He has AAA puient yarano, Kizaru said into the megaphone while munching on popcorn, which was also transmitted on the megaphone, which now had Akainu additionally facepalming. How many times did it make it? How many times did Kizaru joined along with Aokiji? How many critical hits did he have to take to his dignity and pride before Aokiji can fucking go down? Kizaru reached into the bucket for another popcorn but couldn't feel anything inside. He shrugged before he reached down into the ground and took his second bag of popcorn and opened the plastic packaging and refilled his bucket before throwing it away and going back to eating popcorn. Akainu just gritted his teeth and charged at Aokiji, who did the same. One was smirking mockingly at the other, who was gritting his teeth in frustration. He looked at the cigar box in contemplation before taking out a cig and lighting it, inhaling the toxic fumes to calm his nerves. He won the battle, but at what cause? Even as Aokiji handed in his resignation, he continued mockingly smirking and taunting him as he left, much to his dismay. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, brand new, approached his office in a panic with sweat on his face as he saluted, which had Akainu's attention. At ease, Lieutenant Commander. Akainu stood up as brand new dropped the salute, but he did not loosen up at all. What is it? Akainu asked, wondering what had him scurrying here looking panic. Multiple marine bases and ships have been attacked. What? Who's responsible? Akainu understood the man's worries immediately now. Fire Fist Ace, the son of the accursed pirate king. What is his motive? Akainu scowled, remembering the failure of the execution immediately as his name was brought up. Brand new just shakingly raised his hand, which held pictures, which had Akainu raising his eyebrows at before taking them and looking at them. What is this? Akainu asked, dumbfounded, as he turned the pictures towards brand new, looking at him in disbelief. The aftermath of his attack. Sir Akainu just pinched his nose at that as he looked at the pictures. Again, it showed pictures of the deck, hulls, and cabins of numerous marine ships along with pictures of multiple marine bases along with their facilities. They all had one thing in common: multiple messages burnt and charred onto the surfaces, like a lunatic in a mental institute writing on the walls frantically. Change my name back to Portgas. D. Ace. Showed, burnt onto every possible places it could be burnt onto. W. What shall we do, sir? Brand New asked frantically while Akainu raked his brain. Abiding to the cries of a pirate was something he would never do, but right now, he had the responsibilities of managing every single marine. If Gold D. Ace didn't have his name changed, then he would continue attacking anything affiliated with the Marines. He could foresee the severe migraine coming his way if this were to continue. And besides, with his name changing back to Portgas, the damage would have already been done. Multiple posters of him bearing Gol in his name had already been printed and spread throughout the world. They won't retract it back. They will just print another set of posters with his Portgas name on it. Even if they do magically disappear, everyone would have burned it into their memory that Ace was Gold Roger's son. Brand New, Akainu asked, looking at Brand New. Why, yes. Get a new bounty of him with Portgas back in his name, along with increasing his bounty to 910 million for his destruction on marine bases and ships, but make sure every marine is reminded that his name will always truly be Gold D. Ace. Yes, sir. Brand New said, walking out and closing the door behind him, leaving Akainu alone. He slumped down and rubbed his head. He had a feeling, deep down, that maybe he should have let Aokiji handle the upcoming shitstorm as the fleet admiral. He could feel in his gut that it was maybe not worth fighting for the fleet admiral position for the upcoming future, and he just had to be right about that. Chapter 21. The Charlottes split off in separate directions, going building to building and clearing them out of any enemies, while their mother did the same, slowly walking while her children around and below 12 followed behind her closely, although she made sure that Smoothie would chase down and join Luffy in demolishing them. Right now her son was making a beeline towards the center, their main base. He could probably handle himself just fine, but she still wanted someone to keep an eye on him. There are many ways to tell a person's personality when they fight, and Luffy is proving to be similar to Cracker. Reckless. For the rest of her children, anyone above and around 13 were trained in combat by either personally herself or their older siblings. They can reliably take on the fools hiding, considering they were cloaked beneath them, with their pathetic display of strength at their harbor. As she walked further towards the center of the island, she could see smoke and fog coming from several locations, sometimes accompanied by the screaming and agony of people. Good. They are snuffing them out, Tilda. Zeus and Prometheus were floating in the skies before they lowered themselves to around Big Mom's shoulder as her children looked at them in wonder. Mema. I know, she said knowingly and patted her two homies. They nodded and grinned before raising themselves up near the clouds again. She clapped her hand before stopping dead in her tracks, turning around to face them with a bright smile. All right, Tilda, let's have a game of spot the idiot hiding around us. Tilda. Now then, Tilda, where do you think these soon-to-be-dead people are hiding behind? She cheerfully asked her spawns with a dangerous glint in her eyes as she looked around her. She could feel the souls of around 60 people. Most of them were inside the buildings around them and were just behind the closed windows, while others took cover in the alleyways and corners outside. She couldn't help but internally laugh when she could physically see a man clearly trying to hide behind cover on the roof when she was around the height of the building, and he was shaking a lot, making it even more obvious. Hey, there are people around us. Viro asked, clearly surprised even though it didn't show as his hair blocked half of his face. The other children also were surprised and started looking around them. Mama nodded before grinning brightly at them. Indeed, Tilda, and if you spot them, I will give you candy, Tilda. She sang the last part, practically dangling a prize in front of them. Her children perked up at that and turned their heads in several directions, eyeing their surroundings in curiosity without worry if they jumped on them. Their mother was with them after all. As her children were essentially playing hide and seek with them, she slowly took off her hat. Napoleon, sword form, she said with a neutral tone while taking off her hat. Homie, yes mama. She held onto the hilt and stabbed the blade into the ground and waited patiently for her children to spot someone. She noticed Ongle widening his eyes at a direction, and she took a glance to where he was looking and scoffed. A window on the 3rd story quickly closed a split second when it was in her line of sight. The fool probably was trying to take a peek at them. Mema. I saw someone open the window over there. Ongle cheerfully beamed while pointing up at where the idiot was hiding behind. She could now sense panic in his soul, which had her grinning wider a bit while Ongle's siblings followed his finger towards a closed window. "Oh, are you sure you weren't seeing things?" Big Mom said, teasing her little son if he actually did see a man while she walked up to the window. She made sure to add more weight in her steps to let the fool know she was approaching his hiding spot. She placed her hand on the wall above the window and just waited. She was tempted to tap against the wall, but ultimately just waited. "Yeah, I sway dash." Before Ongle could finish his words, the windows slammed open and a man, sweating heavily, pulled out a cannon and aimed at Big Mom's face. He was shaking uncontrollably in fear as she just had a disturbing Cheshire grin sharply pointed at him. Before he could pull the trigger or anything, she slid her hand that was touching the wall and grabbed him from above, squeezing him until she heard his bones breaking, not caring nor stopping as he screamed for his life. She grinned as she was absorbing his lifespan while crushing him, like squeezing juice out of lemon. After a while she eventually could feel and hear his bones break. She grinded the corpse in her hand carefully, turning his bones a bit into powder before she dropped the meat bag. She took the handkerchief she kept in her pocket and wiped the blood from her hands. It was a hassle to clean off when dried and hardened. "Good job, Tilda." She knelt down and rubbed Ongle's head with one finger, which he enjoyed with glee before giving him a giant piece of wrapped candy that she kept in her pockets, to which he beamed it before he unwrapped and started chewing on. She raised her eyes at her other children, who looked on in jealousy before she clapped her hand to get their attention. Now, Tilda, there is still plenty of people around us, Tilda," she cheerfully said, which had their mood lit up at that. "Now, Tilda, where do you think they are?" Her children lit up and started looking more frantically with grins on their face. She waited patiently as her children slowly but surely snuffed 21 more out, to which she drained their souls off. 38 more left, and she could feel the uneasiness, the fear dripping off them, much to her delight. Most of her children grinned as they had a piece of candy. Some of the more observant ones rewarded 2 or 3 for spotting more people, but few of her children were clearly sulking over not getting candy, particularly Dosa. She gently knelt down towards her children who didn't had any and gave them 1 piece each. Much to their surprise, they looked up at their mother in surprise and wonder. "Don't be so disheartened, Tilda. A lot of your siblings also aren't really observant. We each have our own strong points and weak points. The next time we play, it might be something you excel in, Tilda," she explained gently towards her children, who grinned back and had their moods raised up. "Yes, Mama, Tilda," they beamed back adorably. "Ah, the joys of being a mother, Tilda." Smoothie was taking a casual jog with Luffy by her side. It would seem like a nice stroll if you take aside the buildings that were turned to Swiss cheese with the amount of holes and chunks missing from it, and especially the limped bodies of organ harvesters that they punched, kicked, bitch slapped, drained, and stabbed off. It took a while for her to finally catch up to her brother, with her taking care of the ones who weren't in her brother's way and hid like cowards, but she made it and just jogged with her energetic brother, who had a big grin on his face as he punched people left and right while she kicked and stabbed them, sometimes giving them a backhand slap. "You really are like Cracker in his younger days," she offhandedly remarked, seeing the similarities in recklessness while Luffy tilted his head at her in curiosity while punching a person who jumped out of a trash can, always attacking without help nor a plan. She huffed as she sliced a building in half to get to 20 of them who were either hiding behind or inside the building. "Shishishi. Don't worry. I'm strong." Luffy beamed at her while flexing his arm, emphasizing his point, which had Smoothie giggling under her breath in amusement. "Hey, Cracker, you are going to go alone." A 10-year-old Smoothie clung onto said older brother's leg while looking worried. Cracker rubbed Smoothie's head with a confident and arrogant grin. "Yeah, don't worry, I'm stronger than those weak fucks," he reassured her before he widened his eyes, realizing what he said before looking around frantically as if he was being hunted by Cypher. Paul, while Smoothie deadpanned at him. He had a sailor's mouth, a loose tongue to boot with it. She was pretty sure most of her siblings, including her, learned cussing from him. Safe to say Mama was not amused by his antiques. Maybe those rumors of his first words as a baby being motherfucker are actually true. "Don't tell Mama what I said, yeah." Cracker smiled nervously at Smoothie, who continued to give a stoic and emotionless look at her brother. "Buy me grape juice when you come back." "Deal." "Yeah, just like a certain strong, reckless idiot older brother. Aon, I'ma be honest with YA, I wrote the Omake first before the actual chapter LMAO. Anyways, it probably will be weird considering the Omake may actually be longer than the actual chapter, but I have my reasons still working on something really bloody long. At the end of finishing it, it probably would be like 30 to 80k words long theoretically. I don't even know if it is possible to fit it into a chapter 2, was planning to put it here but I am still not finished with it. Anyway, here's our Omake that is canon, especially with Kizaru. Omake features, Shiki gets up to date, Akainu suffering more, Kizaru's happy time, Shiki's bounty. The golden age shall return again. Shiki looked forward towards the island he was approaching with a sinister and grim look on his face, all the while basking in the good old fresh wind and the smell of seawater that he used to taken when sailing before he got his ass handed to him by Garp and Sengo. It seems the world has moved rapidly forward while he was imprisoned and impelled down. Roger was executed in that pathetic little town in the weakest of sea of all places like those bastards planned to carry out the execution. But the biggest piece of news that he was taking in right now was the War of Marineford. To think Edward of all people was gone. It was an odd feeling for him, for a Rocks pirate, even one of the former horsemen and strongest out of them, for him to die was so odd. But it wasn't unexpected, from what he heard while spending his time, and absolutely wrecking the brat's little palace, choking out the cabin boy with seawater who weirdly was smiling all the way through, quite literally asking for death. He didn't know if he was super drunk, or he just swinged like that, but he ain't one to judge a person's kink. With Kaido and his little group, Edward suffered from declining health and old age, even possibly having strokes. Throughout his battle to save one of his sons, he snorted when he thought about Roger's child. He couldn't help but find it all too amusing. Portgas d'Ace, or rather, Gold d'Ace, the child of the pirate king on board of his rival's ship, even acting as a commander under Edward's ship. It was all too funny to him. He should pay a visit to his sons when he finds their whereabouts and have a drink with them. In fact, he was planning to drink with all the emperors and their crews except for Kaido, for he already did that with him, especially with the brat that sailed under Roger and replaced him as an emperor of the seas after his fight with Garp and Sengo, Shanks. And when that is done, he will find Edward's grave, finally pour a bottle of sake for the now dead former crewmate and mourn in silence his final drink with Edward. He closed his eyes and reminiscent about those days again, when he was just a crewmate with people who somehow had either the same or more screws loosed in their heads than him and were stab-happy on a 24/7 basis. He still remember when he woke up in the middle of the night to someone who had a knife above their head, ready to plunge it into his chest, to which he immediately killed them and just went back to sleep. Ah, the good old days. But as much as he would like to remember those blood-soaked glory days and have a drink with the emperors right now, he had to do something. He had several newspapers around him, and he had gone through all of them. Like he suspected, numbskull pirate wannabes are scavenging the seas for Roger's treasure, much to his displeasure. Sengo was promoted to fleet admiral, which Shiki hummed at. He could see it, although it seems he was stepping down now and was replaced by Akainu, who was promoted into an admiral while he was in impelled down, it seems. He still remembered all those times he taunted, mocked, and beat the living snot out of the red dog when he was still a low-ranking fool who blindly chased after them, particularly gunning for Rock's head, much to the crew's amusement back at the time. Some pirates serving as government dogs, to which he scowled at. They were a disgrace to be even considered pirates if they accepted to be under those snobby bastards. He would rather go to war, bring hell forth the Holy Land, and die under his own terms rather than be under their control. Several crews of pirates above 100 million that are considered the worst generation, to which he scoffed at. Worst generation. Has the world forgotten about the previous generation where Rocks was still around? Although as he pondered on that, he realized that they probably put a rug under that bloody and chaotic part of history. He widened his eyes a bit when he thought about something and scoured through the newspaper, and his assumptions were correct. None talked about him being out of impelled down. Hell, none talked about any impelled down prisoners breaking out at all. But as he looked through the news, he knew why. Not only was the execution a failure, but a rookie from East Blue. He couldn't help but feel boiling anger and internally grumble. Of course, had to be that bloody sea of all places was the main reason it went to a shit show. From the revelation broadcasted live that he was the son of some brat called Dragon, to breaking Port gassed D Ace out of his cuffs, to beating the current admirals and even castrating Akainu too, which he winced but laughed at, and finally getting away with it with minimal injuries along with the surviving members of Whitebeard and supposed to be executed brat from Marineford. He was interested in that East Blue brat, especially when he found out his name was Monkey D. Luffy, Garp's grandson, a rookie pirate from Paradise that turned into a major threat, now that got him to bust out laughing maniacally. Better yet, Garp's son and father of Luffy was a revolutionary, the most wanted criminal that is, openly revolting against the government, now that made the sun seem to shine brighter when he found out about this information. He could feel his hair shining gold for a moment, it was so good. It made the fact that this rookie was from that pathetic seem more bearable. The world is in disarray from what Garp's grandbrat did in Marineford, so naturally to save a bit of face, they placed a rug under the mess that is the biggest breakdown in Impel Down history. Yeah, he could see the citizens' reaction to how pathetic the Navy looked after botching up that big event at Marineford, at the Impel Down breakout, and people might protest and riot for their incompetency, so covering it up seemed natural. And he was about to pull that rug for the whole world to see. Hell, he might pull the other older rug while he was at it too. He's sure the others won't mind it. He couldn't help but want to pat Garp's grandbrat on the shoulder for absolutely demolishing the Marine's reputation for what he did when he met him face to face eventually. After all, he helped spread the message he wanted to convey for everyone to know, but he wanted to cement it. The rookie laid the foundation base, and he will show up to place the sign onto it, and finally make the message go through everyone's thick skulls. What this means, what will always be a fact. Pirates are the one true rulers of these seas. Fleet Admiral Akainu. Brand new showed up yet again towards his office looking pale. Not a good sign. It has been a month after the War of Marineford, after dealing with Aokiji, after dealing with Goldie, Ace, and now whatever brand new is about to report to him. There were other notable problematic pirates, especially Eustace Kid. For reasons unknown, he has been more active in attacking towns, ports and marine bases, kicking the violence and murder higher. The motives so far are unknown, but his bounty had been increasing more and more because of his recent atrocities. A lot of high-ranking Marines were sent after him, but he keeps either slipping through their grasp or decimating their forces, much to his irritation. At ease, Lieutenant Commander, report the situation, he said coolly. He was getting adjusted towards his new position and the duties of Fleet Admiral, but that was probably because he was smoking to deal with the shitshow. When he was an admiral, he just had to report to the Celestial Dragons and Sengo. When he still was the Fleet Admiral, he occasionally dealt with upstarts that proved problematic for their potential to become a major threat in the future. They were quickly snuffed out before they could grow. But now, he has faced his biggest opponent yet. Paperwork. Dear Lord, the reports from all the bases, the request for supplies, the request of Marines with notable accomplishments and ranks to be transferred to another base. He has taken interest on two particular individuals after looking through their reports. The requests for research and development in weapons and prototypes form the SSG. There were also reports of notorious pirates being spotted, reports of confrontations and combat aftermaths with said notorious pirates too. How the hell did Sengo handle all of this? Unfortunately for Akainu, Sengo didn't handle all of this alone, and the Buddha might have let it slipped in his mind to tell him he could hand the paperwork to a division he personally made to deal with the stacks of documents and reports. But hey, he's on vacation. He pinched his nose, ready to deal with whatever bad news brand new has come to deliver to him. To add on, Gold Lion Shiki has been spotted approaching Sabayadi. Akainu widened his eyes and let the cigar fall out of his mouth before gritting his teeth. Shiki, the flying pirate, a prominent rival of Roger, more prominent than Whitebeard, for they had confronted each other more frequently. That bastard had tried talking the Pirate King into an alliance where they could rule the bloody world together. Fortunately, that never came to fruition after the Pirate King's execution and the Golden Lion's imprisonment. But now the lion is freed from his cage, with his rival dead. Who knows what his next move will be next? But more importantly, a person who is supposed to be impelled down, out of his cell and sailing freely. If the public recognized him, which they surely will, quickly get every available Marine that is either on or close to Sabayadi to intercept the Golden Lion. Akainu said, standing up and heading outside. I want every vice admiral on base to get on a battleship and form a fleet with Kizaru acting as the head of it. Brand New flinched at that, which had Akainu narrowing his eyes. What is it? Brand New gulped before looking nervously away from Akainu. Admiral Kizaru is. Akainu couldn't believe the bullshit he was hearing right now. What do you mean he went out for his happy times? Kizaru smiled as he went into his room on the small ship that was far, far away from Marine HQ, and locked it. Sitting down on his chair, he placed numerous tone dials on his desk with several recordings of music on them, and for the center and main piece of interest in Kizaru's eyes, a bag of Zaza Tilda that he dropped onto the table. It helps keep his main calm and focused, allows him to plan his next move and series of attacks on his opponents rather than frantically shooting out attacks in wild panic. Speaking of keeping his mind calm, Marineford was a shame. He couldn't hit a blunt before the war. If he did, he could have properly fought and deal with Luffy. He was genuinely taken aback by his usage of armament haki when he was intercepting him. If only Akainu didn't drag him off towards the execution platform before he could get high. He could have kept a cool, calm, collective consciousness. His mind was racing too fast. Too many thoughts were going through his head before he could even think of countering his fist with his own haki at the time. He was planning to get Akainu back for effectively killing his high, but seeing Straw Hat kicked the shit out of Akainu's nuts. Now that had him smiling even without being on some ganja tilda. After that he had to deal with pirates groups popping right, left and pretty much anywhere after. Whitebeard just had to confirm the existence of Roger's treasure. It was pretty easy to deal with them, for they were just idiots who got ambitious with egos that might even be larger than his stash of green. Then Akainu just had to get salty over Aokiji being the next fleet admiral after Sengo. Speaking of, thank fuck that no one knew he occasionally went on a break during Aokiji and Akainu's fight to smoke some good kush, although they probably wouldn't have noticed. Ruined buildings. These ones were still very well intact with a bit of moss on it, several cracks forming and a few walls missing a few chunks, but it still held strong. It seems abandoned, well before those bastards came over and took over this place and made it their base. Angel said while Custard nodded at that in agreement. Is there anything written down about this island before the organ harvesters came around? Custard asked Angel, who shrugged, making her look at Cracker instead. Hey Crack, she said, using his childhood nickname the triplets fondly have given him to get his attention, to which it did. He stopped dead on his tracks and turned slowly towards them. What? Didn't you hear what we were talking about? She pouted childishly at him while he shrugged in his armor still. She sighed and repeated herself. Is there any history written down about this island before? Why, no, the island became the base of these guys, Custard said, kicking one of many that they had slayed. Cracker shrugged. Nope, I don't deal with that shit. Go ask Mondior about it later when we see him. We probably have a book about it somewhere in our library. He turned back and continued walking while the sisters stalled for a second before they continued walking with a sigh. Yeah, they probably should have expected that. As Cracker walked, he was frowning inside his armor, twitching his eyebrows, digging through his memories. Something doesn't add up there, Cracker said internally, cranking the gears in his head as he started recalling his ventures. He had been through several missions which involved claiming islands, gathering ingredients, and etc. He had been to several places. He wages about either a quarter or a third of the new world. He had even traveled to Mogaro Kingdom before to chat with several brokers to inquire information related to something Mama desired, several times throughout his 30s before his strength was required elsewhere, but he still frequented the island somewhat, his last visit being about a year ago, and he will deny any accusation or claims his siblings made about him going there just to witness the underground fights that happen in a certain part of town while betting most of his allowance and spoils of war on a certain pair of funky siblings. No sir, not at all. He has taken several routes there, came across several islands along the way when visiting the place. He never remembered coming across this island before. Not only that, the map Snack used. In the library geography section, they have an archive section containing several maps of the entire world, each map made from when a new year came rolling around the corner. The map Snack was using was the most recent and updated one so far until the next year started to roll in. This island was between Mogaro and Toto Land, Big Bro Daifuku's island to be more specific. That was between the kingdom, and he had traveled along that path, even departed and sailed off from Daifuku's island once. Everything was in proper working condition, everything. The compass definitely was working, considering that they were able to reach the kingdom and go back smoothly. So how the hell did he not see an island that he should have come across? That was something he will think about later, right now. Just kill anything moves. Enemy contact. Just like right now tilde. Pathetic. Katakuri huffed in slight disappointment, expecting a much more stronger force than the ones in the harbor, but he easily plowed through them with ease. Anyone that was called strong amongst the enemy ranks were clearly just some guys that has a grasp of haki, maybe even know a government technique as a bonus. And that was pretty much it. He had set extremely low expectations for them to be able to put up much of a fight, but they somehow managed to dig underground and go lower than he could have ever imagined. But honestly, after seeing Luffy easily deal with that one guy back then, yeah, he probably should have foreseen this. And speaking of Luffy, he expended and stretched his leg with mochi, also adding spikes around before hardening it with haki and let it stay there high up above the buildings before a bunch of enemies bursted forth from their hiding spots and were about to shoot him until they were squashed by his foot. Needs more momentum and just general speed. It would be better if I used my arm instead, he commented to himself, retracting his leg and looking at his hand in thought about it, thinking about how he would gain said momentum to slam down his fist at a fast speed. He also wanted to finish quickly to get back home to eat his beloved donuts tilde, maybe even spinning one on his finger before he ate it, spinning a donut. And it hit him. He was smiling a bit underneath his scarf as he now knew how he would reach the speed. He saw one of the organ harvesters somehow still alive from his attack and was crawling away, albeit slowly and twitching a lot. He took several steps back while facing the crawling man before he turned into a donut and was spinning rapidly towards the man. He leaped up before returning to normal, raised his hand which stretched and enlarged with spikes on it before hardening it with haki, making it look like a gigantic, spiked mace. With the momentum from spinning as a donut, he slammed it hard into the crawling man. I will call this Buzzcut Mochi, he said while inspecting his opponent which was stuck on his arm thanks to the mochi before he grew another idea, a way to finish off the opponent, but he won't put much strength into it. The man was already dead upon impact. He stretched his mochi arm above the buildings and spun several times before he slammed it down, grunting a bit as he put a bit of muscle into it, resulting in an explosion of debris and dust to be formed as he slammed him into the ground. As the dust cleared, a giant hole was formed from where he slammed him into. Katakuri hummed to himself, satisfied with the move he created before he moved forward while thinking, I wonder how many more moves my little brother shall display. He mused while walking towards their base, wondering how he can mimic or get inspired by his little brother's move sets. Luffy was casually jogging with Smoothie towards their base, occasional punching some dude that popped up, keyword being was. As he was running, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, frozen in place for a split second before he had a feral grin with a bit of drool coming out as he turned towards the direction of where that delicious smell he so bloody missed tilde. Meat, he shouted with arms raised before dashing off, literally living Smoothie in dust who just look confused before ultimately shrugging with amusement. Little bro has a strong nose when it comes to his favorite food, it seemed. She saw how Luffy dealt with that one guy back hours ago, really not worth remembering with how weak he was. She probably could deal with the boss herself. But she was curious about what meat tasted like. Smoothie never had eaten anything like meat throughout her life, but her older siblings did. But that was because Mama left them on an island so they wouldn't get hurt while she sailed with the Rock's pirates. It was a rare sign of motherly affection considering how she was like before. Sadly, over time, with how they spent most of their lives in Toto Land where the main source of food is desserts, snacks, and sweets after their mother returned after the Rock's pirates disbandment, her older siblings gradually forgot the taste of meat, so she really had no idea what the taste is like. Sure, many of her siblings, including herself obviously with how she was a sweet general, went out of Mama's territory to do tasks and stuff that benefited the crew and kingdom, but they never really ordered meat before, because they wanted to go back immediately in fear that they would incur the wrath of their mother for taking too long, and they will have to tell her why it took longer than usual. Well, back then anyway, they still were on that mindset that something bad would happen if they were later than usual. Nothing really changed about that. Old habits die hard, she internal thought, grimacing a bit at that. But they were getting better. They were slowly getting used to live and do personal things for themselves and not for their mother's sake and ambition. They were getting used to living out their lives for their own sake and their own lives, do things that they personally wanted to do, without ridicule or disgust from their mother's gaze in the past. They could wear whatever they want without being forcefully dressed up like some kind of doll for all to see and gawk at. They could talk freely and be themselves, no longer putting up a facade, because they weren't allowed to show their true selves to others. She could stop hiding her right eye underneath her hair because it was different than the other. The mere thought of such freedom hasn't truly gotten through her and the older siblings' skulls. Yet, she finally stopped turning her head, which kept looking between the path of her objective and looking to place Luffy ran off to just staring at where he ran off to now. It wouldn't hurt to be selfish and curious now, would she? So, she looked at the direction of the base of the enemies before shrugging and heading towards the direction of where her brother went. It might be irresponsible of her to postpone her duties as a sweet general by dragging out her task to eat foreign food. But it was her life. And damn it, she wanted to enjoy and live a little. And naturally she went from hunting her target to chasing her brother while internally chuckling in amusement. She never really thought much about her freedom till her brother came in, made days of him, socializing with the few of his siblings, with her personally interacting with Luffy for a few minutes. And yet even with those few minutes of interaction, he had her realizing about how she was free to do whatever she wanted now, without even speaking to her about it. But looking back, with Brulee, who seemed to walk more straighter and brighter after coming back, with their little brother, Poire, and Basskarte being more confident with their appearance, pudding, when they leaned in to listen to their night conversation, she couldn't help but hold a genuine smile on her face while facing forward in curiosity and amusement as she spoke to herself. Luffy, you are an interesting little brother. I wonder what effect you would have with the others, Tilda. Amazing. Luffy stared starry-eyed at what seemed to be the canteen kitchen. There were pots of steaming hot curry with multiple bowls, some empty while some filled with either rice, curry, or both. But he ignored that in favor of staring at the giant amount of meat stacked on top of one another. On a plate. He ran over and took a bite, before another, and yeah, you already get the gist of it. Delicious. Tilda, not as good as Sanji, but delicious Tilda, he exclaimed in joy within bites. Oh, so that's what it smells like. Luffy let a confused him, before turning to look at Smoothie with a piece of meat still in his mouth, eyeing the meat like it was some sort of artwork in a museum. Luffy gulped down his food before fully tuning his head to look at Smoothie in confusion before his eyes widen. It can't be. Oh oi, why does it sound like you haven't tasted meat before? Luffy was visible sweating in worry. Who in their life hasn't gone on without meat? Because I never did, Smoothie answered with the most genuine voice, which had Luffy's jaw hanging low in disbelief. It stretched downwards before eventually hitting the floor. Hey! What the hell? You never ate meat in your life? Luffy shouted, almost sounding desperate for it to be a lie, to which sadly it wasn't. It was merely the truth, confirmed, with Smoothie shaking her head at that. Most of us grew up eating nothing more than desserts and sweets, never knew why meat was never imported to Toto land. We had the resources to do so, she shrugged before eyeing the plate. Smoothie went and extended an arm to grab the meat, and Luffy, for once, decided to let someone eat meat in front of him. Because goddamn, a life without knowing the taste of meat is a life he would rather not be in. Smoothie inspected for the final time before she indulged in her desire, taking a bite out of it. She chewed on it before swallowing it and looking at the meat with awe. Delicous. She engulfed the meat and Luffy smiled, before grabbing the entire plate and eating it. She knew what meat tasted like. That's all Luffy cared about before he rapidly engulfed it all in front of her, who looked surprised, her mouth gaping with the corner of her lips facing upwards, while twitching her eyebrows before she rolled her eyes and looked amused rather than annoyed. Now, she could enjoy the meat later when it reached Toto land. She remembered Mama saying she will import it to Toto land, and she takes her promises quite seriously. Although her siblings and herself may have to fight their little brother in order to taste even a single slab of it. Welp, there's that. Smoothie said, wiping her lips with a handkerchief she kept on her. Did you grow up only eating meat or something? You seem quite infatuated with it, Smoothie said, Noting how Luffy looked like a dehydrated man in Arabasta found an oasis when he was eating it. Luffy rubbed his head as the memories of his childhood mentally appeared in his mind while he was smiling to himself. Me, Sabo and Ace were raised with mountain bandits, but we normally went out to hunt for our own food cause they wouldn't feed us. If we wanted food, we need to bring the food. He cheerfully recalled those good old days where they used to be together, but they have their own ambitions and goals now. Their brotherhood is still strong, but they have their own respective crews that they sail with. Gramps would always throw me into a forest into wild beasts to make me strong up until I was 6. Where he tried to train me into being a marine, Luffy said, grumbling, sticking his tongue out at that. As if I would ever be a marine. Smoothie on the underhand winced at that. Make him stronger, her ass. That was blatant fucking child abuse from the hero of the Navy. Although she would admit, that must have been a major factor in her brother gaining haki at such a young age. Seems and sounds traumatizing enough for him to gain haki that way. The brothers he sworn to probably gained haki that way too. She really wanted to bitch slap the fuck out Garp while draining the life out of him for being such an incompetent ass towards her little brother. Dragon more so with how he handed Luffy to said old man, but unfortunately those men aren't here right now. She shoved her hatred for those bastards aside in favor of generally interacting and getting to know her little brother better. That must have been rough being raised by that kind of guy. Mema and him used to fight often. 30 or 40 years ago, Smoothie said, remembering the bedtime stories and tales their mama talked to them about. Hey, mama fought with Gramps. Luffy looked generally shocked while Smoothie nodded in confirmation. Smoothie nodded and took out a pocket watch before putting it back from where she took it. She had enough time to tell some tales from mama. Yeah, in fact, mama used to sail with the Yonkos, most obvious being Whitebeard, Kaido and Shiki.